A dying man's promise. A cartel's missing millions. An ex-lawman with nothing left to lose. High Desert Payback. Chapter 1. The gas station sat on the edge of Lukeville, a rotting outpost before the border crossing. Dust coated the plate glass windows. A neon beer sign buzzed, flickering a dull red against the interior gloom. "Pump 3 halts at $20, the kid behind the counter stated. He wore a stained polo shirt and a plastic name tag reading Toby. Acne covered his chin. He wiped the cracked glass counter with a gray rag. Mercer Sample dropped a crumpled $5 bill on the counter next to a plastic jar of beef jerky. He pointed a calloused finger at the coffee carafe sitting on a hot plate. "That mud fresh?" "Brewed it at 6, Toby said. Mercer checked his stainless steel wristwatch. "Noon." "I will take water," Mercer said. He retrieved a plastic bottle from the humming cooler. He bypassed the change. He exited the gas station. The Arizona sun struck him like a physical hammer. Heat waves distorted the blacktop highway. The asphalt baked his leather boots. He limped toward the gas pumps. 3 steel pins held his right knee together. He earned the medal during a cartel shootout in Nogales, a chaotic morning filled with flying brick dust and screaming civilians. He carried an honorable discharge from the United States Marshal Service, a meager pension, and a 2010 Chevy Silverado. Rust consumed the Silverado's quarter panels. Oil coated the engine block. He unscrewed the gas cap. The pump clicked and hummed, feeding cheap fuel into the tank. A semi-truck rattled down the highway, kicking up a storm of grit. Mercer shielded his eyes. He finished fueling. He climbed into the driver's seat. The cracked leather groaned under his weight. A tarnished St. Christopher medal hung from the rearview mirror. He turned the ignition key. The V8 engine sputtered, caught, and settled into a rough rhythm. The silver medal clinked against the windshield glass. His cell phone buzzed on the cracked dashboard. He lifted the device. "Sample," Mercer answered. "You repair the air conditioning in that rust bucket." The voice belonged to Artie, a dispatcher for Pima County. Artie spent his days in a climate-controlled room in Tucson. "Open windows create a breeze, Artie." "I received a distress ping," Artie stated. Static crackled over the speaker. "Department of Justice Transport. A prisoner van." The GPS beacon went dark, near mile marker 74. "I left the badge on a desk 3 years ago. Call the highway patrol." "Patrol needs an hour to dispatch a cruiser. You sit 5 miles from the marker. I trace your phone signal." "Cease tracing my phone." "Take a look, Mercer." A simple drive-by. Ensure they avoided a flat tire. A flat tire leaves the GPS intact. A dead battery kills a beacon. The manifest lists a high-value target, Artie pressed. A white-collar launderer named Julian Vance. The Bureau outsourced the transport. The marshals took the job. "Go look," Artie finished. The call ended. Mercer tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He steered the Silverado onto Route 85. The Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument expanded on both sides of the blacktop. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels on the rocky ridges, their green arms reaching toward a merciless sky. He rolled the windows down. Wind rushed into the cabin, carrying the scent of baked earth and dry mesquite. He scanned the skyline. A black column stained the blue expanse. Thick smoke. Oily smoke. Mercer tapped his thumbs against the steering wheel rim. Brush fires produce gray smoke. Burning rubber and diesel fuel produce black. He reached mile marker 74. Tire tracks marred the gravel shoulder. Heavy treads cut deep grooves into the dirt. A large vehicle cut the corner, throwing rocks into the ditch. A second set of tracks overlapped the first. Thinner tires. An SUV. Mercer studied the overlapping prints. The SUV tracks displayed an aggressive mud terrain pattern. Expensive rubber. Smugglers drove beaters. Cartel hit squads drove armored SUVs with fresh tires. He turned the wheel. The Silverado bounced off the pavement and hit the dirt trail. The track narrowed. Mesquite branches dragged against the truck doors, screeching against the faded paint. Dust billowed behind the tailgate, coating the rear window. He drove 1 mile. The Silverado struck a deep rut. Mercer's head hit the roof liner. He cursed. He engaged the four-wheel drive transfer case. The front hubs locked with a metallic clank. The truck clawed its way over a dry wash. The smoke column loomed larger. He hit the brakes. The Silverado skidded to a halt on a limestone ridge. Mercer shifted the transmission into park. He grabbed his holster from the center console. He slid the leather over his belt. He popped the thumb brake. He drew his Colt Commander. He racked the slide a fraction. A brass casing caught the sunlight in the chamber. He released the slide and engaged the safety. He exited the cabin. The silence felt heavy. No birds sang. No insects chirped. The desert possesses a natural hum, but gunfire scares the wildlife away. Absolute silence dominated the ridge. He walked toward the edge of the canyon. Sunlight glinted off a shape in the dirt. Mercer knelt. His bad knee popped. He picked up a brass cylinder. 5.56 NATO. Lake City Arsenal head stamp. Military surplus. He found 4 more casings scattered near a crushed creosote bush. A shooter stood on this exact spot. The shooter emptied a magazine into a moving target. Cartel execution squads favor the AR-15 platform. Raul Bispo, known across the border as the Bishop, operated in this corridor. Mercer knew the name. The Bishop treated violence as a corporate strategy, eliminating rivals and liabilities with brutal efficiency. Mercer rolled the brass casing between his thumb and forefinger. The metal retained warmth. He stood. He studied the canyon floor. The drop measured 40 feet. At the canyon bottom, a Ford Transit van rested on its roof. Flames engulfed the rear tires. The melting rubber fueled the black smoke. The van sported a matte black paint job. The intense heat peeled the top layer of paint away, revealing stark white lettering underneath. United States Marshals Service. Mercer felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He knew the vehicles. He knew the men working these desolate transport routes. He shared a locker room with them for 20 years. He holstered the Colt. He began the descent. The steep slope offered 0 handholds. Loose shale and dead roots broke his footing. Mercer planted his boots sideways. A sharp rattle echoed from a rock outcropping. Mercer froze. A western diamondback slithered from the shade, tasting the smoke-filled air before disappearing into a limestone crevice. Mercer resumed his slide. His bad knee throbbed with every step. He ignored the burning sensation in his joint. He slid the final 10 feet, his boots kicking up a dense cloud of red dust. The heat radiating from the burning tires baked the sweat on his face. He approached the crushed cab of the van. The front bumper rested 10 feet from the chassis, twisted into a metal pretzel. The radiator hissed, spewing green coolant into the red dirt. The coolant boiled on the hot rocks, creating a toxic steam. The roof collapsed, crushing the driver's side compartment. The windshield resembled a spiderweb of frosted glass, stained a dark, muddy brown on the interior surface. Mercer covered his mouth and nose with a cotton bandana. The stench of burning hair, scorched metal, and diesel fuel assaulted his senses. He walked to the passenger side. The door frame warped from the impact. He grabbed the metal door handle. The heat blistered his palm. He gritted his teeth, refusing to release his grip. He braced his left boot against the crumpled fender. He shifted his weight. He pulled with all his upper body strength. Metal shrieked against metal. The internal hinge pin snapped. The latch shattered. The door tore free from the frame and crashed onto the dirt. Mercer kicked the hot metal aside. Smoke poured from the cabin, escaping into the canyon air. A small electrical fire crackled on the ruined dashboard. Exposed wires sparked. Mercer peered into the inverted cab. He saw a hand dangling from the crushed driver's seat. A gold wedding band circled the ring finger. Blood dripped from the fingertips, forming a thick puddle on the ceiling of the overturned van. The driver lacked a pulse. The skull trauma proved fatal. The passenger seat sat empty. The white airbags hung like deflated balloons. Mercer shined his flashlight into the footwell. A man wearing a tactical vest lay pinned beneath the crushed engine block intrusion. A silver star caught the flashlight beam. The man drew a ragged breath. Blood formed crimson bubbles on his mouth. Mercer reached for the trapped Marshal. Twisted steel blocked his path. He needed the jaws of life. He possessed a pistol and a bad knee. A sound echoed from the rear cargo hold. Metal scraped against metal. A reinforced steel cage separated the cab from the transport compartment. The steel mesh held firm despite the rollover. Mercer turned his attention to the cage. He tapped his heavy flashlight against the mesh. "Federal officer," Mercer called out, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Status." The scraping stopped. A voice answered from the darkness. The tone lacked panic. It carried a strange, cynical calm. "The air conditioning in this tin can ceased functioning," the voice stated. "I require a mechanic. Or a coroner. I lack the expertise to determine the appropriate professional." Mercer stared through the smoke. He shined the beam into the cage. A pair of polished Italian leather loafers rested against the ceiling of the inverted compartment. The prisoner hung upside down, suspended by the heavy seatbelts, wearing a tailored charcoal suit. Dust coated the fine wool, but the man adjusted his silk tie with a manicured hand. "Identify yourself," Mercer ordered. "Julian Vance," the man replied. He cleared his throat, coughing a speck of soot from his lips. "I prefer sparkling water, but given the circumstances, I will accept tap. Please inform the concierge. My room requires immediate attention." Chapter 2. The cab smelled of copper blood and atomized engine oil. A green puddle of radiator fluid expanded across the red dirt, hissing against the crushed exhaust pipes. A radio microphone dangled from a severed coiled wire, swaying in the heat thermals. "I will handle the concierge," Mercer said to the steel mesh behind him. "Stay quiet." He shifted his focus to the crushed footwell. The trapped Marshal coughed. Blood sprayed the steering column, coating the shattered gray plastic. Mercer shined the flashlight beam on the man's face. Gray skin stretched over sharp cheekbones. A jagged piece of the dashboard pinned his chest. The engine block sat in his lap. The steering wheel pinned his throat. "Miller," Mercer said. He read the embroidered name tape on the tactical nylon vest. Miller opened his eyes. The pupils lacked focus. They darted in the shadows, found the intense flashlight beam, then locked onto Mercer. Get him out," Miller rasped. Crimson bubbles formed on his lips. "I need a hydraulic pry bar," Mercer said. The engine block breached the firewall. "No time." Miller coughed. A wet, tearing sound echoed in his chest cavity. "They drive heavy armor." Mercer reached through the shattered window frame. He grasped Miller's shoulder. The nylon vest felt sticky. "Who drives armor?" Mercer asked. "The Bishop." The name hung in the acrid smoke. Mercer recognized the moniker. Raul Bispo. a cartel enforcer who operated with corporate precision. Bispo eliminated rivals, silenced witnesses, and burned entire neighborhoods to send a message. Bispo treated human life as a negotiable currency. Miller forced his right hand up. The movement caused a fresh wave of blood to spill from his mouth. His fingers fumbled with a Kydex holster strapped to his right thigh. He unclipped the retention strap. He pulled a Glock 22. He shoved the polymer grip toward Mercer. "Take it," Miller wheezed. Mercer accepted the weapon. He checked the magazine. Full weight indicated 15 rounds of .40 caliber hollow points. He racked the slide. A brass casing sat in the chamber. He engaged the safety and tucked the pistol into his waistband next to his Colt Commander. Miller reached into his tactical vest. His fingers dug into a Velcro pouch. He retrieved a small, metallic rectangle. A USB drive. A ruggedized, encrypted model wrapped in a titanium shell. The manufacturer built the casing to survive explosive trauma. He pressed the drive into Mercer's palm. His fingers gripped Mercer's wrist. The grip lacked strength, but the bloody fingernails dug into the skin. "Keep it," Miller said. "Keep it away from the bishop. He wants the keys." Miller closed his eyes. The effort drained the remaining color from his face. The suit in the back. Vance. He knows the lock. Vance represents the cartel. "Accountant," Miller said. "Stole from them. Relocated the funds. And the bishop intends to collect." Miller nodded a fraction of an inch. "Do not let them take the drive. Do not let them take Vance. They retrieve the money. They buy the border politicians. They own the judges." Mercer curled his fingers around the metal drive. The casing felt warm. "I need to extract you," Mercer said. "I own a heavy winch on my truck. I will hook a steel cable to the axle." "My spine separated," Miller said. He stared at the ceiling of the crushed cab. "I feel zero sensation below the ribs. The internal bleeding finishes the job in 2 minutes." Mercer examined the structural damage. Miller spoke the truth. Removing the pressure required fire rescue teams equipped with spreaders. Releasing the weight meant immediate death. Leaving the weight meant slow death. Mercer unclipped his canteen from his belt. He unscrewed the plastic cap. He guided the rim to Miller's cracked lips. Miller swallowed a mouthful of water. He choked. He coughed the water mixed with blood onto his chin. "Thanks," Miller whispered. Mercer reached into Miller's breast pocket. He retrieved a leather wallet. A silver star sat pinned to the leather fold. Mercer stared at the badge. He closed the wallet and shoved it into his back pocket. "I will secure the prisoner," Mercer said. "I will secure the drive." "Word of a marshal?" "Ex-marshal," Mercer corrected. "But my word holds." Miller smiled. A grim, bloody curve of the lips. "Good enough." Miller exhaled a long breath. The rattle sounded like dry mesquite leaves scraping on concrete. His chest sank. It failed to rise. Mercer checked the carotid artery. 0 pulse. The eyes remained open, staring at the crushed metal above. Mercer reached down. He closed the dead man's eyes. He wiped his bloody hand on his denim jeans. "Rest easy," Mercer muttered. He stood. He adjusted his gun belt. He shoved the USB drive into his front pocket. The titanium felt heavy against his thigh. He stepped away from the cab. The heat from the burning tires baked the back of his neck. Black smoke plumed into the desert sky. The smoke created a massive visual beacon. The bishop tracked the beacon. Time ran short. Mercer walked to the rear of the van. The rollover impact mangled the rear doors. The exterior locking mechanism shattered into pieces. The interior steel cage held the true barrier. He peered through the reinforced mesh. Julian Vance hung suspended from the ceiling. Heavy nylon seatbelts strapped across his chest and waist held him in place. A charcoal Super 150's wool suit covered his frame. A silk pocket square matched his tie. Heavy-duty plastic zip ties bound his wrists together. Red welts formed against the white cuffs of his custom dress shirt. The red dust ruined the expensive aesthetic. "Did the driver survive?" Vance asked. "The driver died on impact," Mercer said. "The guard died 1 minute ago." Vance sighed. The sound conveyed irritation. It conveyed zero grief. "A tragedy," Vance said. "I require assistance. The blood rushes to my head. This causes migraines. My physician advises against prolonged inversion." "I hold the cage keys," Mercer said. "I hold the USB drive. I hold the guns." "Congratulations. You represent the new management." Vance twisted his wrists against the plastic restraints. "Cut these zip ties. They chafe my skin." "The bishop brings a hit squad," Mercer said. "He fired the high-velocity rounds that put you in the ditch." Vance stopped struggling. The name hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened. The arrogant facade cracked, revealing the terrified accountant underneath. "Raul," Vance whispered. "You stole his money." "I reallocated corporate assets." Raul calls it stealing. He intends to repossess the assets. "Raul intends to skin me alive," Vance said. The panic elevated the pitch of his voice. "He utilizes a dull machete. He broadcasts the audio to his competitors to instill discipline." "I made a promise to the dead man in the front seat," Mercer said. "A promise to a corpse carries zero weight. I possess $50 million in a decentralized cloud account. You cut me loose, I transfer $5 million to your personal offshore bank account. Tax-free funds. Clean money." Mercer scanned the perimeter. He grabbed a heavy iron tire iron from the scattered debris on the ground. "I prefer a pension," Mercer said. "You earn an hourly wage," Vance pleaded. "I offer generational wealth. Do the math." "I flunked calculus." Mercer stepped up to the cage door. He jammed the flat end of the tire iron into the gap between the door and the frame. He braced his good leg against the bumper. The 3 steel pins in his right knee protested the sharp angle. He ignored the pain. He leaned his weight against the steel bar. The metal groaned. The hinges squealed. "Hurry," Vance urged. "I hear engines." Mercer shoved. The steel bar bent under Mercer's weight. Sweat stung his eyes. He grunted, applying leverage. The locking mechanism screamed in protest. Rust flaked off the hinges. The lock snapped. The cage door swung open. Mercer reached into the cage. He grabbed the seatbelt release button, located near Vance's hip. He pushed the red plastic square. The buckle clicked. Vance plummeted. His skull struck the metal roof of the inverted van. He cursed, a string of profanities concerning the condition of his head. "Stand up," Mercer ordered. Vance scrambled to his feet. He hunched under the low ceiling. He brushed the dirt from his lapels with bound hands. He adjusted his silk tie. Mercer grabbed Vance by the collar. He dragged him out of the cage and out of the van. The desert heat smothered them. The black smoke burned their lungs. The stench of the burning tires grew stronger. Mercer scanned the canyon rim. A glint of sunlight flashed on the limestone ridge. Metal. Tinted glass. A black Chevrolet Tahoe idled on the crest of the hill. The massive engine roared, a low, menacing rumble in the desert air. The heavy off-road tires spun in the gravel, kicking up a rooster tail of red dust. A man wearing a tactical vest leaned out the passenger window. He raised an AR-15 rifle. He rested the barrel on the side mirror. He adjusted his aim down into the canyon. Management arrived, Mercer said. Chapter 3. Muzzle flashes strobe-lit the limestone ridge. Mercer drove his shoulder into Julian Vance's sternum. The impact lifted the accountant off his Italian leather loafers. They hit the red dirt. Mercer landed on top, pressing Vance into the grit. A high-velocity 5.56 caliber round cracked the sound barrier inches above their heads. The bullet struck the inverted steel undercarriage of the Ford Transit van. Sparks showered the canyon floor. A second round punched through the side paneling. A third shattered the remaining fragments of the passenger window. "Stay flat," Mercer ordered. He rolled off Vance. He scrambled on his elbows and knees. He dragged Vance by the collar of the charcoal suit jacket. They slid behind the exposed crushed engine block of the transport van. The cast iron block offered solid ballistic cover against rifle fire. The heat radiating from the burning rear tires scorched the back of Mercer's neck. The engine oil fire hissed and popped. Vance curled his body into a fetal position against the hot metal. He pressed his face into the dirt. His shoulders hitched. Dust coated his pomaded hair, turning the dark strands a muddy rust color. "They intend to kill us," Vance wheezed. His voice lacked the arrogant boardroom timbre. Pure survival panic replaced the polished tone. "They shoot to kill." Mercer ignored the observation. He drew the captured Glock 22 from his waistband. He dropped the magazine into his palm. 15 hollow-point rounds. He slammed the magazine back into the polymer grip. He racked the slide. He checked the safety on his Colt Commander. He placed the Colt on a flat rock beside his knee. 2 guns. Plentiful ammunition for a close-quarters street fight. Inadequate for a long-distance rifle siege. Another 3-round burst hammered the van. 1 bullet severed a steel brake line. Brake fluid sprayed across the hot exhaust manifold. A thick cloud of acrid white smoke joined the black rubber plumes. Mercer analyzed the tactical situation. The shooter held the high ground. The shooter utilized a scoped AR-15. The shooter exercised fire discipline, utilizing 3-round bursts instead of chaotic full-auto sprays. Cartel sicarios often lacked trigger control. This shooter demonstrated military training. 10 minutes, Mercer said. Vance raised his head. He spat red dirt from his lips. "What?" "The crash occurred 20 minutes ago," Mercer said. His voice remained steady, a flat baritone cutting through the crackle of the flames. "I arrived 10 minutes ago. The bishop possesses a large territory. Finding a wreck in the organ pipe expanse requires hours of visual searching. They arrived in 10 minutes. Bullets chewed into the limestone wall 10 feet to their left. The shooter adjusted his angle, searching for exposed limbs. "Explain the response time," Mercer demanded. Vance stared at his bound wrists. He stared at the heavy-duty plastic zip ties securing his hands. "The Bureau protocol," Vance stammered. "High-value targets require localized tracking." Mercer grabbed Vance by the silk tie. He yanked the accountant forward. Their faces hovered, inches apart. "Speak plain English." "The zip ties," Vance choked out. "The plastic contains a micro-transmitter. A localized RFID beacon. Standard operating procedure for the Department of Justice when transporting cartel assets. They monitor the beacon from the chase vehicles." Mercer released the tie. He stared at the thick white plastic bindings. "The chase vehicle sits overturned in a ravine," Mercer said. "The marshals carry the receivers." "Raul purchased a receiver," Vance explained. He wiped a mixture of sweat and soot from his forehead. "He owns a federal dispatcher in Phoenix." The dispatcher sold Raul the frequency code and a cloned tracking monitor. Raul tracks my pulse. He tracks my location. Mercer digested the intelligence. A tracking beacon broadcasted their exact coordinates to a professional hit squad. Carrying the accountant equated to carrying a homing missile. Mercer reached into his front pocket. He extracted a folding Benchmade tactical knife. He flicked his wrist. The black steel blade locked open with a sharp click. "Present your hands," Mercer ordered. Vance thrust his wrists forward. He turned his face away, anticipating a blade slip. Mercer slid the serrated edge of the Benchmade under the thick plastic binding. He pressed the blade against the tension. He sawed upward, angling the sharp steel away from Vance's pale skin. The reinforced plastic resisted the edge. Mercer applied leverage. The zip tie snapped. Vance gasped. He rubbed his raw red wrists. He massaged the circulation back into his fingers. Mercer picked up the severed plastic tie. He examined the thick locking mechanism. A tiny metal node embedded in the plastic caught the sunlight. He tossed the zip tie into the center of the burning tire fire. The plastic melted instantly, fusing with the toxic black sludge. "The signal ends there," Mercer stated. "Let them track the smoke." "They possess eyes on the canyon," Vance argued. He peeked around the edge of the engine block and flinched as a bullet struck a nearby rock. "The tracker elimination provides zero benefit right now. It provides an advantage when we break the line of sight." Mercer leaned his back against the hot metal grill. He studied the eastern wall of the ravine. A dry waterfall chute carved a deep groove into the limestone. Years of flash floods eroded a staggered path of boulders and crevices. The chute offered a blind spot, shielded from the Tahoe's position on the western ridge. Reaching the chute required a 30-yard sprint across open flat dirt. "Observe the eastern wall," Mercer said. He pointed his finger. "The boulder pile. That marks our exit." Vance looked at the rocks. He looked at his ruined suit. He shook his head. "I lack the footwear for mountaineering," Vance said. "My shoes feature smooth leather soles. I require traction." "You require oxygen," Mercer countered. "Staying here guarantees suffocation or a bullet. The gas tank on this transport vehicle contains 20 gallons of fuel. The fire creeps toward the fuel lines. A detonation happens in less than 3 minutes." Vance swallowed hard. He eyed the burning undercarriage. "I run first?" Vance asked. "You run on my command," Mercer said. "I provide covering fire. The shooter ducks. You sprint. You aim for the largest boulder at the base of the chute. You drop behind the rock. You wait. And if he shoots me, you die wearing a bespoke suit." Mercer shifted his position. He gripped the Glock in his right hand. He held the Colt Commander in his left. Dual wielding provides zero accuracy at distance, but it doubles the volume of suppression fire. He needed noise and flying lead to force the rifleman behind cover. "Prepare your legs," Mercer said. Vance crouched like a sprinter in the starting blocks. He stripped the charcoal suit jacket off his shoulders. He tossed the expensive wool garment into the dirt. He rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt. The man understood the gravity of the physics involved. Mercer took a deep breath. The smoke burned his throat. He lunged out from behind the engine block. He aimed high. He focused on the tinted windows of the black Tahoe on the ridge. He pulled the triggers. The Glock and the Colt roared in overlapping staccato rhythms. 40 caliber and 45 caliber rounds chewed the air. Brass casings ejected in a continuous arc, raining down on Mercer's boots. A heavy slug struck the Tahoe's front grille. Another shattered the passenger side mirror. The rifleman on the ridge flinched. The man dropped behind the armored door of the SUV, seeking cover from the unexpected barrage. The incoming rifle fire ceased. "Go!" Mercer roared. Vance pushed off the dirt. He ran. He displayed surprising speed for a white-collar criminal. His arms pumped. His smooth leather shoes slipped in the loose gravel, but he maintained his balance. He crossed 10 yards. 20 yards. The rifleman recovered from the shock. A rifle barrel crested the Tahoe's hood. Mercer fired his final 2 rounds from the Glock. The slide locked back on an empty magazine. He dropped the empty weapon into the dirt. He gripped the Colt with both hands and squeezed the trigger. The heavy .45 round impacted the Tahoe's front tire, causing a loud hiss of escaping air. Vance reached the boulder. He dove headfirst behind the massive limestone rock. He slid into the shadows, panting, clutching his chest. Mercer stopped firing. The Colt slide locked back. Empty. He holstered the empty Colt. He grabbed the empty Glock from the dirt and shoved it into his waistband. He sprinted. His right knee screamed. The steel pins grated against the bone with every heavy footfall. He ignored the white-hot spikes of agony shooting up his thigh. He focused on the boulder. A rifle shot cracked. A bullet impacted the dirt inches from Mercer's left boot. The geyser of red sand peppered his denim jeans. He dove. He hit the gravel behind the boulder. He slid into Vance, knocking the accountant against the limestone wall. Mercer rolled onto his back, gasping for air. His chest heaved. He stared at the blue strip of sky visible above the ravine. "You move slow," Vance remarked. He wiped a streak of dirt from his nose. "I carry extra metal in my leg," Mercer replied. He reached into his pocket and retrieved 2 fresh magazines. He ejected the empty magazines from the Colt and the Glock. He slammed the fresh ammunition home. He racked the slides. "Climb," Mercer ordered. They scrambled up the dry waterfall chute. The narrow crevice forced them to climb single file. Mercer took the lead, finding handholds in the jagged rock, hauling his body weight upward. Vance followed close behind. The accountant cursed every time a sharp rock scraped his manicured hands. The rock walls muffled the sound of the burning van. The rifleman on the ridge fired sporadic shots into the ravine, blind suppression fire meant to pin them down. The bullets struck the canyon floor, far below their current position. They climbed for 5 minutes. The physical exertion soaked Mercer's shirt with sweat. He reached the top of the chute. He grabbed a thick mesquite root and hauled himself over the lip of the canyon. He rolled into the sparse brush, covering the rim. He reached down and grabbed Vance's wrist. He hauled the accountant over the edge. Vance collapsed in the dirt, chest heaving, his expensive dress shirt stained brown and crimson. Mercer crawled through the low brush. He peered through the branches. 50 yards away, his battered Chevy Silverado sat parked on the dirt trail. The sun beat down on the faded paint. The truck represented salvation. The truck represented mobility. Across the canyon, the black Tahoe reversed. The engine roared. The heavy tires spun in the gravel. The driver maneuvered the SUV along the ridge line, seeking a path around the canyon to intercept them on the eastern rim. "The bishop possesses motivation," Mercer muttered. $50 million buys profound motivation, Vance wheezed. He sat up, leaning his back against a saguaro trunk. He intends to drive around the cut. He intends to cut off our escape route. Mercer checked the terrain. The dirt trail led back to Highway 85. The Tahoe owned the advantage of speed and armor on the open road. "We reach the truck," Mercer said. "We drive." "We drive where?" Vance asked. "He controls the highways. He controls the dispatchers. He likely controls the Border Patrol checkpoints." "We drive away from the bullets," Mercer stated. He crouched low. He moved toward the Silverado. Vance followed, mirroring Mercer's low profile. They utilized the thick creosote bushes for visual cover. They reached the truck. Mercer grabbed the passenger door handle. He yanked it open. "Get in. Keep your head below the dashboard." Vance scrambled into the cab. He curled himself onto the floorboard, burying his face near the heater vents. Mercer rounded the hood. He opened the driver's side door. He climbed behind the steering wheel. The leather seat felt hot against his back. He reached for the ignition key. The Tahoe's engine roared in the distance. The heavy vehicle crested a rise on the trail, cutting off their path to the highway. The black SUV blocked the only road out. Mercer gripped the steering wheel. He stared at the approaching armor. Chapter 4. "Keep your head down," Mercer ordered. Julian Vance pressed his cheek against the rubber floor mat. He covered the back of his neck with his hands. The black Chevrolet Tahoe blocked the dirt trail 50 yards ahead. The heavy vehicle sat angled across the ruts, creating a wall of Detroit steel and ballistic glass. A Sicario leaned out the passenger window. He leveled a short-barreled AR-15 rifle. A muzzle flash blossomed. The Silverado's windshield exploded. Tempered glass cubes sprayed the cabin interior. The fragments rattled against the plastic dashboard. They stung Mercer's neck. They accumulated in the folds of his denim jeans. Mercer stomped the brake pedal. He slammed the column shifter into reverse. He hammered the accelerator. The V8 engine roared. The rear tires bit into the gravel. The truck surged backward. More bullets punched through the hood. Metal shrieked. Steam hissed from a pierced coolant reservoir. A heavy slug tore through the driver's side a pillar, missing Mercer's temple by 2 inches. Mercer cranked the steering wheel to the right. The Silverado vaulted off the established trail. It crashed through a dense stand of ocotillo. The spiny, whip-like branches scraped the side mirrors. The chassis slammed against the uneven desert floor. The suspension groaned under the violent impact. The terrain dropped. A wide, dry riverbed cut a jagged path through the limestone. Mercer rode the brake pedal. The truck slid down the steep embankment. It hit the bottom of the arroyo with a bone-jarring thud. Vance groaned from the floorboards. "You ruined the suspension." "My truck," Mercer corrected. "My suspension." Mercer shifted into drive. He navigated the dry wash. The loose, deep sand offered poor traction, but the four-wheel drive transfer case chewed through the material. The truck lurched forward. Mercer grabbed the police band radio microphone from the center console. He thumbed the transmit button. "RD. Pima dispatch. Respond." Static hissed from the dashboard speaker. He switched the dial to the emergency state trooper frequency. He keyed the mic. "Officer down. Mile marker 74. Require immediate assistance." A voice crackled over the frequency. The voice spoke Spanish. The tone conveyed casual amusement. A brass-heavy narco corrido song played in the background. The man on the other end laughed and terminated the transmission. Mercer dropped the microphone. It dangled from the coiled black cord. "They monitor the emergency frequencies," Mercer stated. Vance raised his head above the dashboard line. He brushed glass cubes from his torn white dress shirt. "Raul pays the technicians," Vance explained. "The men who service the radio repeater towers on the border take his money. Raul installs his own relay hardware. The cartel owns the signal. They hear every distress call. They jam the outbound cellular traffic." Mercer steered the truck around a massive, petrified log. He checked the rearview mirror. A thick dust cloud plumed behind them. The Tahoe crested the lip of the arroyo. The heavy SUV plunged down the dirt embankment, intent on pursuit. They maintain the chase, Vance observed. He gripped the edge of the passenger seat. The armored vehicle possesses superior horsepower. They hold the advantage. Horsepower means 0 in deep sand, Mercer said. They carry a half-ton of ballistic steel plate in the doors. Weight sinks. Mercer pressed the accelerator. The Silverado bounced over a dry rock bed. The steering column vibrated in his grip. The Tahoe hit the deep sand at the bottom of the arroyo. The driver overcompensated with the throttle. The heavy armored SUV bogged down. The aggressive mud-terrain tires spun in place, digging deep trenches in the riverbed. The chassis high-centered on a mound of packed earth. Mercer watched the scene unfold in the side mirror. The Tahoe ceased all forward momentum. The doors opened. 4 men stepped into the dust cloud. They raised their rifles. Mercer rounded a sharp bend in the wash. The towering rock wall severed the line of sight. "We gained distance," Mercer said. "Distance delays the inevitable," Vance replied. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "They possess radios. They call additional units. They squeeze the perimeter. We require a paved road." "We require an alternative route," Mercer said. "Raul blocks the highway." The Silverado labored over the rough terrain. The damaged front quarter panel scraped against the front tire tread. A rhythmic metal-on-rubber shriek accompanied their progress. The friction created a burning rubber odor inside the cabin. Mercer reached under his seat. He retrieved a canvas tool bag. He tossed the heavy bag onto Vance's lap. "Find a crowbar," Mercer ordered. Vance unzipped the canvas. He rummaged through the loose wrenches, socket sets, and screwdrivers. He produced a short steel pry bar. "I located one." "Hold it." Mercer stopped the truck in the shadow of a sandstone overhang. He left the engine running. He exited the cabin. He snatched the pry bar from Vance's hand. Mercer walked to the crumpled front fender. He wedged the flat edge of the pry bar between the jagged metal and the tire rubber. He gripped the steel shaft with both hands. He applied his entire body weight. The damaged metal shrieked. It bent outward, clearing the tire tread by 2 inches. He tossed the pry bar into the truck bed. It clattered against the ribbed steel liner. He climbed back into the driver's seat. He checked the dashboard instrument cluster. The temperature gauge needle stabilized below the red danger zone. The fuel gauge indicated a half tank. "We continue," Mercer said. He guided the truck out of the arroyo. The Silverado climbed a steep rocky incline. The engine whined in low gear. They crested the hill. A vast expanse of broken badlands stretched before them. Jagged red rock spires and deep crevices formed a natural, unmapped maze. Mercer drove into the maze. He utilized the towering rock formations to mask their dust trail. "You possess a destination?" Vance asked. He picked a cube of tempered glass out of his hair. "I possess a direction," Mercer said. "North leads back to the highway. South leads to the border checkpoint. East leads to the Tohono O'odham Reservation," Vance added. "Empty desert. Zero infrastructure." "West," Mercer decided. He turned the steering wheel. "We drive west." "What exists west?" "Nothing. Nothing offers zero protection. Nothing offers zero resources. Nothing offers zero ambush points," Mercer countered. The wind howled through the shattered windshield, drowning out further debate. The sun began its descent toward the jagged western horizon. The changing light cast long purple shadows across the desolate rocks. Mercer kept his foot on the gas pedal, pushing the wounded Silverado deeper into the badlands. Chapter 5. "The dust permeates the fabric," Julian Vance stated. He slapped his trousers. A gray cloud puffed from the expensive wool. This suit requires a specialized dry cleaner in Manhattan. A Tucson strip mall operation ruins the weave. Dust defines the territory, Mercer Sample replied. Mercer steered the battered Silverado into the deep shadow of an eroded sandstone overhang. The rock formation created a natural garage, shielded from the sky and the surrounding ridges. He shifted the transmission into park. He killed the engine. The cooling metal ticked. The radiator hissed, bleeding steam from a bullet puncture in the plastic reservoir tank. The sweet stench of boiling coolant mixed with the scent of baked earth. Mercer opened the driver's door. He stepped onto the gravel. His right knee popped, a sharp sound echoing in the confined space. He stretched his back. He surveyed the perimeter. The dry wash offered a temporary sanctuary. High walls of red rock enclosed them on three sides. Dense stands of chala cactus and brittle bush blocked the entrance trail. He dropped the tailgate. The rusty hinges shrieked. He unbuckled his gun belt. He laid the leather rig on the ribbed steel bedliner. He placed the captured Glock 22 next to his Colt Commander. Vance pushed the passenger door open. He stumbled out of the cabin. He leaned against the front fender. He dragged a manicured hand through his pomaded hair, ruining the style, matting the strands with sweat and grime. He stared at the desolate landscape. "We reside in the middle of a wasteland," Vance declared. He checked his stainless steel wristwatch. The temperature exceeds 100 degrees. Cellular service remains non-existent. We lack provisions. Mercer retrieved a canvas duffel bag from the truck bed. He unzipped the main compartment. He extracted a bottle of gun solvent, a brass bore brush, and a stained cotton rag. "We possess an hour of daylight," Mercer said. He unscrewed the solvent cap. The sharp, chemical odor of Hoppy's No. 9 filled the air. "We rest. We wait for the temperature to drop. We move under the cover of darkness." Vance watched Mercer strip the magazine from the Colt. Mercer cleared the chamber. He caught the ejected brass casing in his palm. "Let us conduct a cost-benefit analysis," Vance proposed. He pushed off the fender. He walked toward the tailgate. Mercer threaded the cotton rag through the brass eyelet of the cleaning rod. He pushed the rod down the Colt's barrel. "I lack a calculator," Mercer said. "You require basic arithmetic," Vance countered. He stopped 3 feet from Mercer. He adjusted his torn silk tie. The gesture felt absurd in the dirt, a reflex from a boardroom life. "Raul hunts a specific prize. The cartel considers me a liability. They consider the money their property. They intend to retrieve the funds and eliminate the liability." "I read the summary," Mercer said. He pulled the rod through the barrel. He inspected the rag. Black carbon stained the white cotton. "You underestimate the scale," Vance insisted. "I relocated $50 million. Clean funds. Untraceable cryptocurrency. Raul holds zero comprehension of digital assets. He utilizes violence. I utilize blockchain obfuscation. The USB drive in your pocket acts as a physical authenticator key. The drive accesses the decentralized ledger. Without the drive, the money sits in a digital vault forever. The drive stays in my pocket." "Keep the drive," Vance offered. He leaned closer. His eyes held a desperate intensity. "Keep the physical token. Escort me to a secure terminal in Phoenix. I authorize the transfer. $5 million enters an offshore account bearing your name. You retire today. You purchase a private island. You replace this rusted vehicle." Mercer placed the clean Colt barrel on the tailgate. He picked up the frame. He applied 3 drops of lubricating oil to the slide rails. "5 million, Mercer repeated. "A modest finder's fee," Vance stated. 10% of the gross. Tax-free. Clean money. The cartel traces nothing. Mercer reassembled the Colt. He racked the slide. The oiled metal snapped forward with a satisfying click. He engaged the safety. He holstered the weapon. He reached into the duffel bag. He retrieved a plastic canteen. He unscrewed the cap. He drank 3 swallows of warm water. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He tossed the canteen to Vance. Vance caught the plastic container against his chest. He stared at the scratched surface. "I requested sparkling," Vance muttered. "The desert offers tap." Vance grimaced. He raised the canteen. He drank the warm water. He coughed, spilling a stream down his chin, soaking his ruined white dress shirt. He handed the canteen back. "Evaluate your situation," Vance pushed. He pointed a finger at Mercer's boots. "You wear resold cowhide. You drive a salvaged wreck. You live paycheck to paycheck. A government pension provides subsistence. The state offers 0 reward for this transport." "My boots fit my feet," Mercer said. He picked up the Glock. He released the slide. "My truck transports my gear. My pension covers my coffee." "You display a profound lack of ambition. Ambition fills graveyards." Mercer wiped the Glock frame with the oily rag. He checked the polymer grip for cracks. "Raul owns politicians," Vance explained. "He pays Border Patrol supervisors. He bribes local judges. The cartel controls the infrastructure. You fight an entire corporate entity with 2 handguns and a broken truck. I fought them before." "You view this as a moral exercise," Vance declared. "You view yourself as a righteous man. A knight in a faded denim jacket." "I view myself as an escort service," Mercer said. He slammed a full magazine into the Glock. "You represent the client. I represent a walking corpse if Raul catches us. Then avoid capture." Vance threw his hands in the air. The gesture conveyed absolute frustration. He paced a tight circle in the dust. "A dead man handed you a piece of metal," Vance shouted. His voice echoed off the sandstone walls. "Marshal Miller died." His authority vanished the second his heart stopped. "You risk your life for sentiment. A promise to a corpse holds 0 market value." Mercer placed the Glock next to the holster. He turned. He looked at Vance. His blue eyes locked onto the accountant. The gaze carried the weight of 20 years on the border. "Market value fluctuates," Mercer said. "My word holds a fixed rate." Vance stopped pacing. He stared at Mercer. He searched the older man's face for a crack, a hesitation, a sign of greed. He found nothing. He found weathered skin, deep lines, and an immovable resolve. The realization settled over Vance. He realized bribery held 0 power here. He realized his money represented colored paper to the man standing before him. Vance slumped against the rock wall. He slid down the abrasive sandstone until his tailored trousers hit the dirt. He pulled his knees to his chest. He rested his forehead on his forearms. "Raul utilizes a dull machete," Vance whispered. "He records the audio." Mercer turned back to the tailgate. He rummaged through the canvas bag. He located a foil-wrapped protein bar. The foil reflected the fading sunlight. He tossed the silver rectangle at Vance. The bar struck Vance's shoe. Vance picked it up. He inspected the packaging. "This expired in 2021, Vance noted. "The foil preserves the nutrients," Mercer stated. Vance tore the wrapper open. He bit into the dense brown square. He chewed. He swallowed with immense difficulty. Mercer closed the canvas bag. He strapped the gun belt around his waist. He secured the buckle. He adjusted the holsters on his hips. He felt the weight of the Colt and the Glock. He felt the weight of the titanium USB drive pressing against his thigh. The sun vanished behind the western ridge. The desert sky transitioned from a harsh, blinding blue to a bruised deep purple. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 5 minutes. Shadows stretched across the canyon floor, pooling into pools of absolute darkness. The wind picked up. The breeze whistled through the spiny branches of an ocotillo plant, creating a low, mournful hum. Mercer walked to the front of the Silverado. He unlatched the hood. He propped the heavy steel up. He inspected the damaged radiator reservoir. The plastic tank displayed a ragged bullet hole near the top seam. The fluid level sat below the puncture line. He retrieved a roll of heavy-duty duct tape from the cab. He ripped a strip of the silver adhesive. He plastered the tape over the bullet hole. He smoothed the edges with his thumb. A primitive patch. It required water to function. He grabbed the plastic canteen. He unscrewed the cap. He poured half the remaining drinking water into the radiator reservoir. "You waste our hydration," Vance observed from his spot in the dirt. "A dry radiator destroys the engine block," Mercer replied. He closed the hood. The metal latch engaged with a solid clunk. "We require the engine block to reach civilization. We require wheels." "San Felice sits 10 miles south," Vance said. "A copper town. The map in my head marks it." "San Felice died 30 years ago," Mercer said. "The copper veins ran dry. The miners left. Abandoned buildings provide cover. Deep mine shafts provide hiding spots." Mercer considered the tactical geometry. San Felice offered 4 walls and a roof. The open desert offered exposure to thermal optics. "We drive to San Felice," Mercer decided. He walked to the edge of the sandstone overhang. He peered into the gathering darkness. He scanned the horizon. He looked for headlights. He looked for dust clouds. He saw empty rock formations and endless brush. He listened to the silence. Chapter 6. "The engine produces a grinding noise," Julian Vance stated. He braced his hands against the cracked plastic dashboard. "Metal fatigues," Mercer Sample said. "The water pump requires a replacement." The Silverado crawled along the 2-lane asphalt. The moon provided a sliver of illumination. The headlights threw twin yellow beams into the total blackness. The high beams remained shattered from the afternoon gunfight. A green neon sign flickered a mile down the road. The buzzing light cut through the dark. "A service station," Vance noted. He leaned forward. The seatbelt locked against his chest. "We require coolant. We require gasoline. I require a telephone." "Raul severs landlines," Mercer said. Mercer reached for the headlight switch. He plunged the truck into darkness. He steered by the moonlight. He eased his foot off the accelerator. The heavy Chevy rolled on residual momentum. "Turn the lights on," Vance demanded. "We possess 0 visibility." "Headlights announce our arrival," Mercer countered. "Headlights provide targets." The truck coasted toward the green neon. The sign spelled out Oasis. A cinder block building sat beneath a rusted tin roof. 2 vintage fuel pumps stood on a concrete island. A battered Ford pickup rusted in the side lot. Mercer stopped the Silverado 50 yards from the station. He shifted into park. He kept the engine running. The serpentine belt squealed a high-pitched protest. He rolled down the window. He listened. The wind moved through the desert scrub. The neon sign buzzed. He smelled it. Raw, uncombusted gasoline. The sharp chemical odor overpowered the scent of the dry earth. "Stay in the cab," Mercer ordered. He drew the Glock 22. He opened the door. He stepped onto the asphalt. His boots crunched on loose gravel. He kept his silhouette low, utilizing the shadows at the edge of the road. He approached the concrete island. The odor grew thick. It stung his eyes. He surveyed the fuel pumps. Sledgehammer blows dented the metal casings. Shattered glass covered the concrete. The digital displays showed blank, ruined faces. Severed thick black rubber hoses lay on the ground like dead snakes. Clear gasoline pumped from the underground tanks, forming a massive shallow pool across the asphalt. Mercer holstered the Glock. He drew the heavy aluminum flashlight from his belt. He thumbed the switch. The beam sliced the darkness. The light illuminated the cinder block building. Someone utilized a heavy chain to rip the security bars from the front windows. The heavy glass storefront lay in ruins. Mercer stepped over the pooling gasoline. He moved to the shattered entrance. Glass crunched beneath his thick leather soles. He shined the beam inside. Racks of potato chips and candy bars littered the linoleum floor. Motor oil bottles leaked golden fluid across the aisles. The cash register sat on the counter, smashed open. The drawer gaped empty. A pair of work boots protruded from behind the counter. Mercer entered the store. He maintained a grip on the flashlight. His right hand rested on the holstered Colt Commander. He rounded the counter. An older man lay on his back. He wore blue denim overalls and a gray undershirt. A name patch read Roy. Blood soaked the gray cotton. 2 bullet holes marred the center of his chest. Tight grouping. Professional execution. Mercer knelt. He checked the man's neck. 0 pulse. The skin felt warm. The kill happened under an hour ago. Mercer stood. He examined the wall behind the counter. The landline telephone hung from the jack. The cord dangled, snipped clean by wire cutters. He heard a scuff of leather on linoleum. Mercer spun. His hand dropped to the Colt. Julian Vance stood in the doorway. The accountant stared at the dead man behind the counter. The color drained from Vance's face. His mouth opened. He inhaled a sharp breath. "I ordered you to stay in the truck," Mercer stated. "I despise the dark," Vance muttered. His voice shook. He pointed a trembling finger at the corpse. Raul accomplished this. Raul sent a message. He murdered a bystander. He destroyed the resources, Mercer corrected. He shined the light on the severed phone cord, then aimed it at the smashed water cooler in the corner. He smashed the pumps. He drained the water. He cut the communication lines. Vance stepped backward. His designer shoes slipped on a patch of spilled motor oil. He caught his balance against the doorframe. "He tracks us," Vance said. "He predicts our movements." "He herds us," Mercer said. Mercer walked out of the store. He bypassed the terrified accountant. He stepped onto the asphalt island. He stared down the 2-lane highway. The road stretched south into the black desert. "Herds us," Vance echoed. He followed Mercer outside. He kept a distance from the pooled gasoline. "Explain the terminology." "A predator shapes the environment," Mercer said. "He removes the alternatives. We need water. We need fuel. He poisons the wells. He burns the bridges. To achieve what goal? To force a specific direction." Mercer pointed south. "San Felice sits down this road. A dead town. A box canyon. High walls. A single entrance. An ambush site," Vance deduced. The panic elevated his pitch. "He waits for us in the ruins. He builds a trap. Then we turn the vehicle around," Vance shouted. He waved his hands at the darkness. "We drive north. We abandon this route. North puts us on a flat, exposed highway," Mercer countered. He possesses off-road armor. He possesses thermal optics. We drive a wounded truck across flat ground. He snipes us from a mile away. We present stationary targets. San Felice presents a cage. A cage provides walls, Mercer said. Walls stop bullets. Walls limit angles. Mercer turned his back on the ruined gas station. He walked toward the idling Silverado. The engine whined, a desperate sound in the immense silence. Vance jogged to keep pace. You drive us into an execution chamber. You intend to deliver me. Mercer stopped. He grabbed Vance by the front of his torn white shirt. He slammed the accountant against the rusty quarter panel of the truck. The impact knocked the breath from Vance's lungs. I intend to survive, Mercer growled. His face hovered inches from Vance's eyes. I intend to complete the transport. Raul wants the USB drive. He wants the keys to your offshore accounts. He lacks the funds until he extracts the password from your skull. Vance swallowed. He tortures me for the phrase. He requires you alive to conduct the transaction, Mercer said. He requires the drive intact. Mercer released the shirt. He patted the heavy titanium lump in his front pocket. We carry the leverage, Mercer stated. We force the confrontation on our terms. He climbed into the driver's seat. He slammed the door. Vance stood in the dirt. He stared at the smashed gas station. The neon sign flickered, buzzing a harsh electric tune. He looked at the endless black horizon. He rubbed his raw wrists. He walked to the passenger door. He pulled it open. He slid onto the cracked leather seat. You play a dangerous hand of poker, Vance said. He buckled the seatbelt. I play the cards dealt, Mercer said. He shifted the transmission into drive. He pressed the accelerator. The Silverado left the Oasis station behind. The headlights illuminated a green mile marker sign. San Felice. 5 miles. Mercer reached under the seat. He dragged the heavy canvas tool bag onto his lap. He unzipped the main compartment. He felt the cold steel shapes inside. Wrenches. Pliers. A flare gun. He needed a tactical advantage. He needed to turn the cage into a meat grinder. Prepare yourself, Mercer ordered. The negotiations start soon. Chapter 7. Raul hoards shrink-wrapped pallets of $100 bills, Julian Vance said. He stacks currency in concrete bunkers beneath avocado farms in Michoacan. The man understands volume. He comprehends physical mass. Mercer Sample steered the Silverado around a dead coyote flattened on the asphalt centerline. The headlights caught the yellow reflection of the animal's remaining eye. Cartels require liquidity, Vance continued. Cash incurs mold. Rats chew paper. The federal government tracks bulk cash shipments with thermal imaging and weight scales at the border checkpoints. You digitized the pallets, Mercer said. I evolved the business model, Vance corrected. He gripped the door handle. The truck vibrated over a section of grooved pavement. I converted the physical weight into algorithmic sequences. I established a network of decentralized wallets. I bounced the funds through offshore shell corporations in Cyprus, the Seychelles, and Malta. I washed the blood off the money. Mercer reached into his front pocket. His fingertips brushed the cold metal of the titanium USB drive. He pulled the heavy rectangle free. He tossed it onto the cracked plastic of the center console. The metal clattered against a pile of spare fuses. Vance stared at the drive. The dashboard instrument lights cast a faint green glow across his soot-stained face. Marshal Miller died for a thumb drive, Mercer stated. A Ledger Stacks cold storage wallet, Vance said. Modified with aerospace-grade titanium armor. The hardware survives immersion in salt water. It survives a house fire. It requires a physical connection to a computer terminal to execute a transfer. The bishop wants the metal, Mercer said. He possesses the men. He possesses the guns. The metal represents an empty vault without the combination, Vance said. He tapped a manicured index finger against his right temple. The blockchain requires a mnemonic seed phrase. 12 random English words. The sequence unlocks the cryptographic barrier. Without the words, the hardware acts as a paperweight. Mercer kept his eyes on the road. The black desert rushed past the shattered windows. The night air rushed into the cabin, chilling the sweat on his neck. You memorized the 12 words, Mercer deduced. I memorized nothing, Vance scoffed. Human memory fails under duress. The bishop employs experts in pain compliance. They extract information with battery cables and locking pliers. I anticipated the interrogation. Vance leaned back against the headrest. He touched his ruined silk tie. He stared at the bullet holes punching through the roof of the cab. I wrote the sequence down, Vance said. I utilized a micro-etching tool. I inscribed the 12 words on the inside of the tortoiseshell frame of my Tom Ford sunglasses. Mercer tapped the brake pedal. The truck slowed. The brake pads squealed against the warped rotors. You wear zero sunglasses, Mercer observed. Vance closed his eyes. He exhaled a long breath through his nose. The sound carried pure defeat. I lost the eyewear during the rollover, Vance admitted. The impact shattered the side window. The sunglasses flew from my breast pocket. They rest somewhere in the dirt near the burning transport van. Mercer processed the data. The dynamic of the hunt shifted. The leverage fragmented. The bishop inspects the crash site, Mercer said. He searches the debris. He searches for my corpse, Vance said. He expects to find the USB drive on my person. He finds a pair of designer sunglasses in the dirt. He crushes them under his boot, Vance predicted. He views them as debris. He lacks the intellect to check the inner frame for microscopic text. The man solves problems with a machete, not a magnifying glass. Mercer grabbed the titanium drive from the center console. He slid the metal back into his pocket. He slapped his hand against the steering wheel. The situation complicates itself, Mercer said. The situation offers a new negotiation, Vance argued. He twisted in his seat. The seatbelt retractor locked. Raul chases a ghost. He chases an encrypted brick. We hold the hardware. The password rots in a ravine. The funds remain locked in the blockchain forever. The bishop knows you live, Mercer countered. He tracks your pulse. He intercepts the emergency frequencies. He intends to capture you and extract the funds. He fails, Vance shouted. He pounded his fist against the dashboard. Plastic cracked under the blow. I lack the words. I cannot surrender the sequence. You explain the micro-etching to him, Mercer suggested. He executes me out of spite, Vance shot back. He punishes failure with dismemberment. The missing sunglasses guarantee my death. The Silverado engine sputtered. A heavy knock echoed from the engine block. The temperature gauge needle crept toward the red danger zone. The duct tape patch on the radiator reservoir held, but the water boiled away into the desert air. The truck dies, Vance noted. The engine overheats, Mercer corrected. We possess momentum. We possess a destination. A green highway sign appeared in the headlight beams. The reflective paint glowed in the dark. San Felice, 2 miles. Mercer steered the vehicle around a sharp curve. The highway narrowed. The asphalt crumbled at the edges, giving way to loose shoulder gravel. The terrain elevated. Red rock walls rose on both sides of the 2-lane road, forming a natural canyon funnel. A choke point, Mercer identified. An execution corridor, Vance muttered. Mercer checked his rearview mirror. Total darkness filled the glass. No headlights followed them. The absence of pursuit unsettled him more than a visible threat. The bishop orchestrated a coordinated trap. The cartel enforcer closed the net. The bishop requires you alive, Mercer said. He outlined the tactical reality. He requires the USB drive intact. We exploit his greed. He realizes the truth eventually, Vance said. He realizes the money vanished. We ensure he realizes the truth on our timeline. Mercer reached under the driver's seat. He dragged the heavy canvas tool bag into his lap. He unzipped the main compartment. He felt the cold steel tools inside. He grabbed a heavy iron pipe wrench. He tossed the wrench onto Vance's lap. Vance stared at the heavy metal tool. He picked it up with a trembling hand. The iron weighed 3 pounds. I lack combat training, Vance stated. I operate spreadsheets. You possess a skull, Mercer said. You swing the iron at any man attempting to crack it. Mercer returned his right hand to the steering wheel. The truck groaned up a steep incline. The transmission slipped, whining as the gears failed to catch. The canyon walls tightened, squeezing the road into a bottleneck. A flickering light appeared at the crest of the hill. Not a neon sign. Not a street lamp. Fire. A burning barricade blocked the entrance to San Felice. Stacked railroad ties blazed across the asphalt, casting a hellish orange glow against the canyon walls. Mercer downshifted the transmission. He drew the Colt Commander from his holster. He rested the heavy barrel on the window frame. The welcoming committee, Mercer announced. Chapter 8. Raul hoards shrink-wrapped pallets of $100 bills, Julian Vance said. He stacks currency in concrete bunkers beneath avocado farms in Michoacan. The man understands volume. He comprehends physical mass. Mercer Sample steered the Silverado around a dead coyote flattened on the asphalt centerline. The headlights caught the yellow reflection of the animal's remaining eye. Cartels require liquidity, Vance continued. Cash incurs mold. Rats chew paper. The federal government tracks bulk cash shipments with thermal imaging and weight scales at the border checkpoints. You digitized the pallets, Mercer said. I evolved the business model, Vance corrected. He gripped the door handle. The truck vibrated over a section of grooved pavement. I converted the physical weight into algorithmic sequences. I established a network of decentralized wallets. I bounced the funds through offshore shell corporations in Cyprus, the Seychelles, and Malta. I washed the blood off the money. Mercer reached into his front pocket. His fingertips brushed the cold metal of the titanium USB drive. He pulled the heavy rectangle free. He tossed it onto the cracked plastic of the center console. The metal clattered against a pile of spare fuses. Vance stared at the drive. The dashboard instrument lights cast a faint green glow across his soot-stained face. Marshal Miller died for a thumb drive, Mercer stated. A Ledger Stacks cold storage wallet, Vance said. Modified with aerospace-grade titanium armor. The hardware survives immersion in salt water. It survives a house fire. It requires a physical connection to a computer terminal to execute a transfer. The bishop wants the metal, Mercer said. He possesses the men. He possesses the guns. The metal represents an empty vault without the combination, Vance said. He tapped a manicured index finger against his right temple. The blockchain requires a mnemonic seed phrase. 12 random English words. The sequence unlocks the cryptographic barrier. Without the words, the hardware acts as a paperweight. Mercer kept his eyes on the road. The black desert rushed past the shattered windows. The night air rushed into the cabin, chilling the sweat on his neck. "You memorized the 12 words," Mercer deduced. "I memorized nothing," Vance scoffed. "Human memory fails under duress. The bishop employs experts in pain compliance. They extract information with battery cables and locking pliers. I anticipated the interrogation." Vance leaned back against the headrest. He touched his ruined silk tie. He stared at the bullet holes punching through the roof of the cab. "I wrote the sequence down," Vance said. "I utilized a micro-etching tool. I inscribed the 12 words on the inside of the tortoiseshell frame of my Tom Ford sunglasses." Mercer tapped the brake pedal. The truck slowed. The brake pads squealed against the warped rotors. "You wear zero sunglasses," Mercer observed. Vance closed his eyes. He exhaled a long breath through his nose. The sound carried pure defeat. "I lost the eyewear during the rollover," Vance admitted. "The impact shattered the side window. The sunglasses flew from my breast pocket. They rest somewhere in the dirt near the burning transport van." Mercer processed the data. The dynamic of the hunt shifted. The leverage fragmented. "The bishop inspects the crash site," Mercer said. "He searches the debris." "He searches for my corpse," Vance said. "He expects to find the USB drive on my person. He finds a pair of designer sunglasses in the dirt. He crushes them under his boot," Vance predicted. "He views them as debris. He lacks the intellect to check the inner frame for microscopic text. The man solves problems with a machete, not a magnifying glass." Mercer grabbed the titanium drive from the center console. He slid the metal back into his pocket. He slapped his hand against the steering wheel. "The situation complicates itself," Mercer said. "The situation offers a new negotiation," Vance argued. He twisted in his seat. The seatbelt retractor locked. Raul chases a ghost. He chases an encrypted brick. We hold the hardware. The password rots in a ravine. The funds remain locked in the blockchain forever. "The bishop knows you live," Mercer countered. "He tracks your pulse. He intercepts the emergency frequencies. He intends to capture you and extract the funds." "He fails," Vance shouted. He pounded his fist against the dashboard. Plastic cracked under the blow. "I lack the words. I cannot surrender the sequence." "You explain the micro-etching to him," Mercer suggested. "He executes me out of spite," Vance shot back. "He punishes failure with dismemberment. The missing sunglasses guarantee my death." The Silverado engine sputtered. A heavy knock echoed from the engine block. The temperature gauge needle crept toward the red danger zone. The duct tape patch on the radiator reservoir held, but the water boiled away into the desert air. "The truck dies," Vance noted. "The engine overheats," Mercer corrected. "We possess momentum. We possess a destination." A green highway sign appeared in the headlight beams. The reflective paint glowed in the dark. "San Felice, 2 miles." Mercer steered the vehicle around a sharp curve. The highway narrowed. The asphalt crumbled at the edges, giving way to loose shoulder gravel. The terrain elevated. Red rock walls rose on both sides of the 2-lane road, forming a natural canyon funnel. "A choke point," Mercer identified. "An execution corridor," Vance muttered. Mercer checked his rearview mirror. Total darkness filled the glass. No headlights followed them. The absence of pursuit unsettled him more than a visible threat. The bishop orchestrated a coordinated trap. The cartel enforcer closed the net. "The bishop requires you alive," Mercer said. He outlined the tactical reality. "He requires the USB drive intact. We exploit his greed." "He realizes the truth eventually," Vance said. "He realizes the money vanished." We ensure he realizes the truth on our timeline. Mercer reached under the driver's seat. He dragged the heavy canvas tool bag into his lap. He unzipped the main compartment. He felt the cold steel tools inside. He grabbed a heavy iron pipe wrench. He tossed the wrench onto Vance's lap. Vance stared at the heavy metal tool. He picked it up with a trembling hand. The iron weighed 3 pounds. "I lack combat training," Vance stated. "I operate spreadsheets." "You possess a skull," Mercer said. "You swing the iron at any man attempting to crack it." Mercer returned his right hand to the steering wheel. The truck groaned up a steep incline. The transmission slipped, whining as the gears failed to catch. The canyon walls tightened, squeezing the road into a bottleneck. A flickering light appeared at the crest of the hill. Not a neon sign. Not a street lamp. Fire. A burning barricade blocked the entrance to San Felice. Stacked railroad ties blazed across the asphalt, casting a hellish orange glow against the canyon walls. Mercer downshifted the transmission. He drew the Colt Commander from his holster. He rested the heavy barrel on the window frame. "The welcoming committee," Mercer announced. Chapter 9. The stolen Jeep Wrangler rolled down the center of San Felice. The aggressive off-road tires crushed dried mesquite pods and faded beer bottles. The Copper Company abandoned the town in the late 80s. The desert reclaimed the real estate. Skeletal wooden buildings lined the dirt avenue. Collapsed porches spilled dry rot timber onto the street. A saloon facade leaned against a rusted water tower. The wind whipped through the empty window frames, creating a low, hollow whistle. "We inhabit a graveyard," Julian Vance stated. He stared through the cracked windshield. He kept his hands in his lap. Plaster dust from the motel explosion coated his ruined designer trousers. "Graveyards offer quiet," Mercer Sample replied. Mercer steered the Jeep off the main thoroughfare. He navigated an alley choked with dead tumbleweeds. He parked the vehicle inside the hollow shell of a collapsed livery stable. The surviving tin roof shielded the Jeep from aerial observation. He killed the engine. The silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. "They bring reinforcements," Vance said. "The bishop lost 4 men in Gila Bend. He replaces them. He surrounds this location. We require an extraction team. We require federal helicopters." "Federal helicopters require coordinates," Mercer said. Mercer grabbed the aluminum flashlight from the center console. He exited the Jeep. The night air held a sharp chill. He checked the action on his Colt Commander. A brass .45 caliber casing sat in the chamber. He engaged the thumb safety. Vance pushed his door open. He stepped onto the dirt. He shivered in his torn white dress shirt. Mercer pointed the flashlight beam at a 2-story brick building at the end of the alley. Faded white lettering spanned the brick facade. Consolidated Copper Assay and Administration. "The cartel jams the digital cellular networks," Mercer explained. He walked toward the brick structure. "They control the local repeater towers. They lack the resources to jam analog radio frequencies across the entire spectrum. Shortwave signals bounce off the ionosphere. They bypass local towers. You expect to find a functioning radio in a 30-year-old ruin. A mining operation requires communication with the railhead," Mercer said. "They utilize heavy equipment. They utilize dynamite. They maintain base stations." Mercer reached the heavy oak door. An iron padlock secured the latch. Rust fused the internal tumblers. He drew the captured Glock 22 from his waistband. He aimed the muzzle at the iron hasp. "Step back," Mercer ordered. Vance retreated 3 paces. He covered his ears with his hands. Mercer pulled the trigger. The .40 caliber hollow point shattered the rusted iron. Sparks showered the wooden porch. The lock hit the dirt with a heavy thud. Mercer kicked the door. The oak swung inward on groaning hinges. He stepped into the darkness. He swept the flashlight beam across the interior. Dust motes danced in the white cone of light. A thick layer of dirt covered the floorboards. Overturned metal desks formed a maze in the main lobby. Gutted filing cabinets spilled yellowed paper across the room. Rat droppings dotted the paperwork. The air smelled of dry rot and oxidized copper. The scavengers stripped the copper wiring, Vance observed. He followed Mercer inside. He avoided the piles of debris. Methamphetamine addicts loot these towns. They strip the copper to sell for scrap. They steal the electronics. Addicts steal flat-screen televisions, Mercer corrected. They steal modern copper. Vintage electronics hold zero pawn value. Mercer bypassed the front desks. He headed for a closed door at the rear of the lobby. A frosted glass pane bore the title, Superintendent. He pushed the door open. This room offered cramped dimensions. A massive wooden desk dominated the space. A leather chair rotted behind it. Mercer shined the light on the desk surface. A metal box the size of a microwave oven sat on the scarred wood. Heavy black dials and toggle switches covered the front panel. A brand name stood out in silver lettering, Kenwood TS830S. A coiled black wire connected the unit to a heavy metal microphone. A high-frequency transceiver, Mercer said. He blew a layer of dust off the top panel. Vacuum tube technology. Bulletproof hardware. Vance moved closer. He inspected the ancient machine. He touched a Bakelite dial. The unit requires electricity, Vance pointed out. The power grid died 3 decades ago. You locate a radio. You lack a power source. I own a Jeep, Mercer said. Mercer handed the flashlight to Vance. Hold the beam steady, Mercer commanded. Mercer turned his back on the radio. He jogged out of the office. He navigated the ruined lobby and stepped back into the cold night air. He walked to the hidden Jeep. He released the hood latches. He propped the metal open. The engine block ticked as the metal cooled. He reached into his canvas tool bag. He retrieved a crescent wrench. He loosened the terminal bolts on the heavy 12-volt battery. He disconnected the cables. He grabbed the plastic handle and hauled the heavy black cube out of the engine bay. The lead-acid battery weighed 40 pounds. The weight strained his bad knee. He ignored the pain. He carried the battery back into the administration building. He entered the superintendent's office. He dropped the battery onto the floorboards beside the desk. The wood groaned under the impact. Vance kept the flashlight trained on the radio. 12 volts direct current fails to power a desktop base station, Vance stated. He gestured at the wall outlet. The machine requires 120 volts of alternating current. The plugs fail to match. Mercer grabbed a thick, black power cord dangling from the back of the Kenwood. He pulled his Benchmade tactical knife from his pocket. He flicked the blade open. The radio utilizes an internal power supply to convert the current, Mercer explained. I bypass the internal supply. I wire the direct current straight to the board. He sliced the thick rubber insulation off the power cord. He exposed a red wire and a black wire. He stripped an inch of copper from both ends. You risk a catastrophic short circuit, Vance warned. You fry the internal components. You possess one radio. I possess 0 alternatives, Mercer said. He knelt beside the Jeep battery. He wrapped the exposed red copper wire around the positive terminal post. He wrapped the black wire around the negative terminal post. He stood up. He reached for the power toggle switch on the front of the Kenwood. He flipped the metal switch upward. A loud click echoed in the small room. A series of glass vacuum tubes inside the metal casing glowed a faint, warm orange. A low hum emanated from the internal chassis. The analog frequency dial illuminated with a soft amber light. Static erupted from the front speaker. A harsh white noise filled the dusty office. "It draws power," Vance said. The accountant stared at the glowing dials. A shred of hope entered his voice. "Power represents step 1, Mercer said. Transmission represents step 2. Mercer grabbed the heavy metal microphone. He depressed the push-to-talk button on the side. The static cut out. "CQ, CQ, CQ," Mercer spoke into the grill. "This is a distress transmission. Any station on this frequency, respond." He released the button. The static roared back. The speaker hissed. 0 human voices returned the call. Mercer adjusted the main tuning dial. The amber needle slid across the frequency numbers. The pitch of the static changed, rising and falling like ocean waves. "The antenna line," Mercer muttered. He leaned over the desk. He inspected the rear panel of the radio. A thick coaxial cable connected to the antenna port. The cable snaked up the wall and disappeared through a hole in the ceiling plaster. "The copper thieves leave the vintage radios," Mercer said. "They climb the roofs and cut the thick antenna cables for the raw metal. The radio functions, but the mouth lacks a megaphone," Vance translated. Mercer dropped the microphone onto the desk. He picked up the flashlight. "I need to check the roof line," Mercer said. "I need to inspect the cable." "I stay here," Vance declared. He pulled the iron pipe wrench from his belt. He gripped the heavy tool in both hands. "I guard the equipment." "Lock the door behind me," Mercer instructed. Mercer left the office. He found a wooden staircase in the lobby. The steps groaned under his boots. He climbed to the second floor. A narrow hallway led to a maintenance ladder attached to the wall. The iron rungs led to a roof hatch. He climbed the ladder. He pushed the heavy wooden hatch upward. The hinges fought him, but the wood gave way. Mercer hoisted himself onto the flat, tar-paper roof. The cold wind hit him. He stood up. He swept the flashlight across the black tar. A rusted steel mast stood near the chimney. A severed black coaxial cable dangled from the base of the pole. The thieves took the copper wire extending into the sky. The thieves left a dead stump. Mercer walked to the edge of the roof. He looked down the dirt main street of San Felice. The town sat silent under the moonlight. The shadows stretched long and deep between the decaying buildings. Mercer turned his attention toward the canyon entrance. He looked north, toward the highway they abandoned. He saw movement. A mile down the access road, a procession of headlights cut through the darkness. The beams bounced over the rough terrain. 4 vehicles. 5 vehicles. SUVs and heavy trucks. They drove in a tight convoy. They operated without sirens. They operated with lethal intent. The bishop arrived. He brought his army. Mercer stared at the approaching headlights. The cut-off antenna cable lay useless on the tar paper at his feet. Chapter 10. Mercer Sample descended the iron rungs. His boots struck the second-floor hallway. He navigated the dark corridor and descended the wooden staircase. The steps groaned under his weight. He pushed the superintendent's door open. Julian Vance sat on the floorboards beside the heavy desk. He clutched the iron pipe wrench in both hands. The Kenwood radio cast an amber glow across his soot-stained face. The speaker hissed a steady rhythm of static. "The antenna line terminates on the roof," Mercer stated. "Thieves took the copper. They left a dead stump." Vance dropped his head against the desk. We possess zero communication. We possess company, Mercer corrected. A convoy approaches the town limits. 5 vehicles. Heavy armor. Vance squeezed the iron wrench. His knuckles turned white. A harsh, synthetic chirp shattered the silence. Vance flinched. He dropped the wrench. The iron clattered against the floorboards. The chirp repeated. A vibration rattled the scattered paper clips on the wooden desk. Mercer shined his flashlight on the sound. A black plastic burner phone spun in circles on the scarred wood. The screen illuminated the dark. An unknown number flashed on the digital display. Your pocket sits empty, Mercer observed. I placed the device on the desk, Vance explained. He stared at the vibrating plastic. The battery holds a charge. The cellular signal remains dead. The cartel jams the towers. The cartel controls the towers, Mercer corrected. They allow specific signals through the blockade. They whitelist their own hardware. Mercer grabbed the phone. He pressed the green accept button. He lifted the plastic speaker to his ear. Sample, Mercer answered. Mr. Sample, a voice replied. The tone carried zero malice. It sounded smooth, educated, and transactional. The cadence belonged in a corporate boardroom. My name is Raul Bispo. The Bishop. A title bestowed by competitors, Bispo said. I prefer Director of Asset Recovery. You inhabit the administration building in San Felice. The brick structure at the end of the main avenue. Correct. Mercer walked to the frosted glass window. He wiped a layer of grime from the pane. He looked through the glass. Headlights cut the darkness at the edge of town. Engines idled, creating a low collective rumble in the desert air. I see your headlights, Mercer confirmed. I bring 20 contractors, Bispo stated. I bring semi-automatic rifles. I bring thermal optics. I bring an absolute mandate to retrieve my employer's property. You hold 2 items of interest. The titanium drive. The accountant. I hold the leverage, Mercer said. Bispo chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. You hold dead weight, Mr. Sample. Julian Vance represents a liability to both of us. He steals. He lies. He cowers in the dirt while better men bleed. He possesses a specific password. My contractors possess the tools to extract that password. You extract nothing from a corpse, Mercer said. We hold a fortified position. I own 2 firearms. I own plentiful ammunition. You breach this building, you lose men. You risk a stray bullet, striking your accountant. A dead accountant equals lost funds. I accept an acceptable margin of risk, Bispo countered. I prefer a clean balance sheet. I prefer efficiency. I offer a severance package. State the terms. Leave the titanium drive on the desk, Bispo instructed. Secure the accountant to a chair. Exit the rear door. You keep your weapons. You keep your life. You hike into the desert. My men ignore you. We conduct our business with Julian. You return to your pension. Mercer turned from the window. He looked at Vance. The accountant stared at him, eyes wide with pure terror. Vance read the situation. He understood the offer. $5 million, Vance mouthed. He held 5 fingers in the air. He pointed at Mercer. He pointed at his own chest. Costa Rica. Mercer ignored the silent bribe. He pressed the phone tighter against his ear. I made a promise to the marshal in the wrecked van, Mercer said. A pause stretched across the cellular connection. Sentiment, Bispo sighed. The word carried genuine disappointment. Sentiment ruins profit margins. The marshal died. His jurisdiction expired. You owe him zero loyalty. I owe him my word. Your word stops bullets? Bispo asked. My word dictates my actions. Consider the geometry, Mr. Sample. You defend a crumbling brick box. You defend a thief. You lack an extraction team. The situation ends one way. I offer an exit. Take the exit. Mercer checked the action on his Colt commander. He felt the heavy metal in his palm. Come take the accountant, Mercer challenged. A foolish decision. Bispo's voice turned cold. The corporate veneer vanished. The cartel enforcer emerged. I burn the building to the ground. I sift the ashes for the titanium drive. I take Julian alive. I spend 3 days teaching him the anatomy of his own nervous system. Start the lesson, Mercer said. He pushed the red end button. He tossed the burner phone onto the desk. Vance scrambled to his feet. He grabbed Mercer's arm. He offered a deal, Vance shouted. You reject a guarantee of survival. Mercer shoved Vance against the wall. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. He offered a lie, Mercer stated. He eliminates witnesses. You walk through that rear door. A sniper puts a bullet in the base of your skull. He ties loose ends. He leaves 0 variables. We face 20 men. Vance screamed. We face automatic weapons. You sentence us to death over a dead man's promise. Mercer grabbed the heavy iron pipe wrench from the floorboards. He shoved the cold metal into Vance's chest. Vance wrapped his hands around the tool. I sentence us to a fight, Mercer corrected. We dictate the terms. We force them into the bottleneck. We make them bleed for every inch of floor space. Headlight beams swept across the frosted glass window of the office. The intense white light illuminated the swirling dust filling the room. The rumble of the engines intensified. Heavy tires crunched on the gravel outside the front doors. Car doors slammed. Metal boots hit the wooden porch. The audit begins, Mercer said. Chapter 11. Heavy boots splintered the wooden porch. Mercer Sample shoved the heavy oak desk across the floorboards. The cast-iron legs gouged deep trenches in the wood. He jammed the desk against the frosted glass door of the superintendent's office. He created a barricade. Julian Vance huddled in the corner. He clutched his knees to his chest. He abandoned the iron pipe wrench. The tool lay on the floor, useless against automatic weapons. They enter the lobby, Vance whispered. His voice cracked. Rifle butts smashed the front doors of the assay building. Hinges screamed. Glass shattered. The intruders flooded the main room. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom, casting long, erratic shadows against the interior brick walls. Mercer drew the Glock 22. He pressed his back against the brick wall beside the office door. He checked the magazine. 12 rounds of .40 caliber hollow point remained. He carried a single spare magazine. He carried the Colt Commander with 7 rounds of .45. 20 bullets. 20 contractors outside. Clear the debris, a voice commanded in the lobby. Spanish. The tone belonged to a squad leader. Check the side offices. Move by the numbers. Metal desks scraped across the linoleum out in the main hall. Sicarios kicked overturned filing cabinets aside. Mercer looked at Vance. The accountant shook violently. Sweat cut clean tracks through the soot on his face. Mercer reached into his front pocket. He pulled out the titanium USB drive. The metal felt cold. He held the drive up. He caught Vance's eye. Mercer pointed the barrel of the Glock at the titanium rectangle. The bishop wants the keys, Mercer said. He kept his voice low, a rough rasp beneath the noise of the cartel search party. I intend to use the keys. I open the door. I show them the drive. I threaten to put a .40 caliber round through the memory chips. We negotiate a path to the Jeep. Vance stared at the gun barrel. He stared at the titanium drive. His eyes widened. His jaw trembled. "Put the gun down," Vance pleaded. "A bluff requires a threat," Mercer explained. "I show them the hardware. I show them the consequence of a breach. The consequence lacks substance." Vance hissed. He pushed himself off the wall. He scrambled across the floorboards on his hands and knees. He grabbed Mercer's pant leg. "The threat holds no weight." Footsteps approached the frosted glass door. A silhouette appeared behind the pane. A sicario tested the brass knob. The locked mechanism held. The sicario pushed his shoulder against the wood. The heavy desk absorbed the impact. "Locked door," the sicario called out. "Rear office." Mercer grabbed Vance by the collar. He hauled the accountant close. "Explain the substance," Mercer demanded. "The drive is empty," Vance choked out. Tears cut through the grime on his cheeks. "The drive is a decoy." The words hung in the dusty air. Mercer stared at the titanium rectangle in his hand. He remembered the dying Marshal in the crushed transport van. He remembered Miller's bloody fingers pressing the metal into his palm. "Keep it away from the bishop." Miller believed it held the accounts, Mercer stated. "The Department of Justice demanded physical collateral," Vance confessed. The truth spilled from him in a frantic rush. "They demanded hardware. I purchased a blank Ledger Stacks drive off the internet. I wrapped it in a titanium aftermarket case. I handed it to the federal prosecutors. I told them the drive contained the routing protocols. You handed them a paperweight." "I protected my leverage," Vance argued. "The government freezes assets. They seize crypto wallets. I maintained control. The sole key to the 50 million resides on the sunglasses in the desert dirt. That titanium shell contains zero data. It contains factory default settings." A heavy thud rattled the office door. The sicario outside took a running start and slammed his combat boots into the wood. The frosted glass cracked. A spiderweb pattern spread across the pane. "Breaching tools," the squad leader ordered from the lobby. Mercer released Vance's collar. The accountant slumped to the floor. Mercer looked at the metal drive. He risked his life for a prop. He traded a quiet retirement for a plastic dummy wrapped in expensive metal. He bled for an illusion. He slid the drive back into his pocket. "The bishop believes the illusion," Mercer said. "Raul employs technical specialists," Vance countered. "He captures the drive. He plugs it into a terminal. He discovers the fraud in 10 seconds. He subjects us to the machete. We prevent the connection." A sledgehammer struck the office door. The brass lock shattered. The frosted glass exploded inward. Shards rained across the desk barricade. The heavy wood splintered and caved. A sicario climbed over the broken door frame. He wore a Kevlar helmet and a black tactical vest. He raised an AR-15. A tactical flashlight mounted to the rifle barrel blinded Mercer. Mercer raised the Glock. He fired twice. He aimed center mass. The .40 caliber rounds struck the Kevlar plates on the sicario's chest. The impact knocked the breath from the man's lungs. The man stumbled backward, tangling his boots in the ruined door frame. Mercer shifted his aim. He squeezed the trigger a third time. The bullet struck the man's throat, bypassing the body armor. The sicario collapsed. His rifle clattered against the floorboards. "Contact!" a voice screamed from the lobby. Automatic fire erupted. Bullets chewed through the brick walls. Drywall dust filled the air like a thick white fog. The noise reached a deafening pitch. The Kenwood radio took a stray round. The plastic dials shattered. The amber light died. Sparks showered the desk. Mercer dropped to his knees. He grabbed Vance by the shoulder. He dragged the accountant toward a side window overlooking the alley. "We abandoned the fortress," Mercer yelled over the gunfire. He holstered the Glock. He grabbed the heavy wooden chair behind the desk. He swung it like a baseball bat. The chair smashed through the window pane. Wood splinters and glass rained into the alley below. Mercer pushed Vance toward the jagged opening. "Climb out," Mercer commanded. "Drop to the dirt." Vance hesitated. He stared at the dark drop. Bullets ripped through the office door. The heavy oak desk splintered under the sustained fire. The barricade crumbled. Mercer shoved Vance through the window frame. The accountant tumbled into the night air. A sharp cry echoed from the alley as Vance hit the ground. Mercer threw his right leg over the window sill. His bad knee scraped the broken glass. A jagged shard sliced through his denim jeans. He felt the warm slide of blood down his calf. He grabbed the brick ledge. He swung his body out of the room. A sicario breached the office. The man leveled his rifle at the window. Mercer let go of the bricks. He fell. He hit the alley dirt. The impact jarred his spine. He rolled to absorb the momentum. He came up on his good leg. He drew the Colt commander. He looked up. The sicario leaned out the broken window, searching the dark alley with his rifle light. Mercer raised the heavy .45. He fired one shot. The heavy slug struck the brick archway above the window. Red dust exploded into the sicario's face. The man flinched and retreated into the office. Mercer grabbed Vance by the arm. The accountant clutched his left ankle. "I twisted the joint," Vance groaned. "Walk on the pane," Mercer ordered. They limped down the dark alley. The sounds of shouted orders and breaking wood echoed from the assay building behind them. The bishop's men secured the empty room. They realized their targets escaped the trap. Mercer and Vance reached the collapsed livery stable. The stolen Jeep Wrangler sat hidden in the shadows beneath the surviving tin roof. Mercer opened the passenger door. He shoved Vance into the seat. He rounded the hood and climbed behind the steering wheel. He jammed the key into the ignition. He turned the metal. The starter motor clicked. A hollow, metallic snap. Mercer tried the key again. Click. He stared at the dashboard. The instrument panel remained dead. The radio remained dark. He remembered the heavy lead-acid battery sitting on the floorboards of the superintendent's office. He remembered wiring the Kenwood transceiver to the Jeep's power source. He stranded them. "The engine refuses to start," Vance observed. The panic returned to his voice. Mercer gripped the steering wheel. He stared through the windshield at the dark, empty buildings of San Felice. The bishop commanded a fleet of vehicles. The bishop commanded an army. Mercer possessed 2 handguns and a useless piece of titanium. "We walk," Mercer said. Chapter 12. Mercer Sample grabbed a canvas tool bag from the dead Jeep. He slung the heavy canvas over his shoulder. "Move," Mercer commanded. He stepped out of the livery stable shadows. The night air bit his skin. He scanned the main dirt avenue of San Felice. 200 yards away, flashlight beams crisscrossed the front of the assay building. Raul Bispo's men swarmed the brick structure like angry hornets. Shouts in Spanish cut through the cold air. They discovered the broken second-story window. They discovered the empty rooms. The focused assault transitioned into a sweeping dragnet. Julian Vance dragged his left boot. The twisted ankle slowed his pace. He leaned against the rotting wood of a saloon facade, gasping for breath. They possess superior numbers, Vance wheezed. His chest heaved beneath the ruined white dress shirt. They execute a grid search. They clear every building. They trap us in the net. Mercer checked the terrain. The skeletal wooden buildings offered zero ballistic protection. A .50 caliber rifle round punches through dry rot timber with zero deflection. They required mass. They required density. He pointed toward the northern edge of the ghost town. A massive, rusted copper smelting tower loomed against the starlit sky. At the base of the tower sat a squat, windowless structure built of poured concrete. The powder magazine, Mercer identified the building. The mining company stored commercial dynamite inside. Concrete walls measure 3 feet thick. A single steel door controls the entrance. Vance stared at the concrete bunker. He wiped a streak of blood and soot from his forehead. A tomb, Vance countered. We enter a box. They lock the door from the outside. They pour gasoline through the roof vents. We hold the interior angle, Mercer explained. He grabbed Vance's arm and hauled him forward. We force them through a fatal funnel. I prefer a concrete tomb over a wooden sieve. They abandoned the main street. They navigated the debris-choked alleys behind the false fronts. Broken glass crunched under Mercer's leather boots. The steel pins in his right knee ground together, radiating white-hot spikes of pain up his thigh. He locked his jaw. He pushed the pain into a dark corner of his mind. The rumble of heavy engines echoed through the town. The bishop deployed his vehicles. 2 armored SUVs rolled down the center avenue. Heavy off-road tires crushed the desert scrub. Roof-mounted light bars activated, flooding the dead town with blinding white LED illumination. The shadows vanished. Run, Mercer ordered. They broke from cover. They sprinted the final 50 yards across an open expanse of baked hardpan. A Sicario, in the passenger seat of the lead SUV, spotted the movement. He shouted a warning. He leveled a rifle out the window. A 3-round burst cracked the sound barrier. Bullets struck the dirt behind Vance's heels, kicking up geysers of red dust. Mercer reached the concrete magazine. He grabbed the heavy iron handle of the steel door. Rust scaled the metal. He planted his boot against the concrete frame and pulled with his entire body weight. The hinges groaned. The steel door yielded, opening a foot. Mercer shoved Vance through the gap. The accountant tumbled into the pitch-black interior. Mercer squeezed through the opening. He grabbed the interior handle. He slammed the heavy steel shut. Total darkness consumed them. The thick concrete severed the roar of the SUV engines. The air inside smelled of ancient chemical salts and stagnant dust. Mercer clicked his aluminum flashlight on. The beam swept the room. Empty wooden pallets littered the concrete floor. Zero dynamite remained. The miners cleared the inventory 3 decades ago. A single steel ventilation grate sat near the ceiling on the rear wall. Mercer dropped the canvas tool bag onto a wooden pallet. The metal tools clanked. Vance sat on the floor, clutching his swollen ankle. He stared at the steel door. They saw us, Vance stated. The panic stripped the corporate polish from his vocabulary. They bring the entire force to this box. Mercer ignored the panic. He unzipped the canvas bag. He reached inside. He pulled out the orange plastic flare gun. He cracked the breech open. He plucked the spent plastic casing from the motel explosion out of the chamber. He let the empty shell hit the concrete floor. He reached into his jacket pocket. He retrieved a fresh 12-gauge magnesium flare. He slid the red cylinder into the barrel. He snapped the action closed. He walked over to Vance. He shoved the flare gun into the accountant's chest. Vance raised his hands, refusing to touch the plastic weapon. Take it, Mercer commanded. I lack firearm proficiency. Mercer grabbed Vance's right hand. He forced the man's fingers around the textured orange grip. Aim at the center of the doorway, Mercer instructed. Pull the trigger. The magnesium burns at 3,000 degrees. It melts body armor. It blinds night vision. Mercer turned back to the canvas bag. He dug past the wrenches and the screwdrivers. He pulled out a heavy, forged steel lug wrench from the Jeep's jack kit. 2 feet of solid iron. He tossed the steel bar to Vance. The metal clanged against the concrete beside the accountant's leg. Your secondary weapon, Mercer said. A man breaches the door, you swing the iron. You aim for the kneecaps or the skull. You break bone. Vance stared at the flare gun in his right hand. He stared at the iron bar by his left leg. He looked up at Mercer. The beam of the flashlight caught the absolute terror in the younger man's eyes. I manage portfolios, Vance whispered. I structure tax shelters. I avoid physical altercations. Mercer drew the Glock 22 from his waistband. He checked the chamber. A brass casing caught the light. He holstered the weapon. He drew the Colt Commander. He thumbed the safety off. He stood over the accountant. Stand up, Mercer ordered. Vance used the wall to push himself to his feet. He favored his good leg. He held the flare gun pointed at the floor. Raise your right hand, Mercer said. Vance blinked. Confusion replaced the terror for a fraction of a second. What? Raise your right hand. Vance lifted his right hand. The orange plastic flare gun dangled from his fingers. Mercer locked eyes with the accountant. The ex-marshal straightened his posture. He adopted the formal, flat tone of a federal courtroom. I, Mercer Sample, acting under the authority vested in the United States Marshal Service, do hereby deputize Julian Vance, Mercer recited. You represent the law in this jurisdiction. You hold the authority to enforce federal statutes. You hold the right to defend your life with lethal force. Vance lowered his hand. He stared at Mercer. A dead man gave you a piece of metal, Vance said. That grants you zero authority to deputize a civilian. The badge sits in my back pocket, Mercer said. He patted his denim jeans. The metal grants the authority. You act as a deputy of the federal government. You carry a weapon. You fight. Heavy boots crunched the gravel outside the steel door. Mercer stepped to the side of the entrance. He leveled the heavy barrel of the Colt Commander at the center of the steel slab. Assume your position, deputy, Mercer said. Vance swallowed hard. He bent down and scooped up the heavy iron lug wrench with his left hand. He held the flare gun in his right. He limped to the opposite side of the door frame. He pressed his back against the cold concrete. He raised the plastic orange barrel. A metal object struck the exterior of the steel door. A heavy, rhythmic tapping. Mr. Sample, Raul Bispo called out. The cartel enforcer's voice resonated through the thick metal. You select a sturdy coffin. I admire the structural integrity. Mercer kept his sights locked on the door hinges. The vault holds 0 exits, Bispo continued. I place 2 men at the door with ballistic shields. I place a marksman on the ridge aimed at your ventilation grate. We prepare a breaching charge for the lock. The negotiation window closes. Mercer thumbed the hammer back on the Colt. A sharp, metallic click echoed in the concrete room. Blow the lock, Mercer challenged. Collect your dead. Silence fell over the exterior. The tapping stopped. Vance's breath hitched in the dark. The accountant gripped the iron bar. The metal bit into his palms. The transformation commenced. The white-collar criminal shed his boardroom armor. The feral instinct for survival took the wheel. A high-pitched whine pierced the quiet outside. "They possess a motorized concrete saw," Vance identified the sound. "They cut the hinges," Mercer confirmed. Sparks showered the gap between the steel door and the concrete frame. A diamond-tipped circular blade bit into the rusted iron hinges. The screech of tearing metal filled the small magazine, vibrating their teeth, deafening their ears. Chapter 13. Sparks bit from the doorframe as the diamond blade chewed through the top hinge, sending a screech vibrating through the concrete walls. Julian Vance covered his ears and dropped the iron lug wrench. The heavy metal clanged against the floor, forcing him to scramble in the dark to retrieve it while maintaining a white-knuckled grip on the flare gun. Mercer Sample studied the shower of orange sparks. The door utilized 3 heavy hinges, and the saw operator needed at least 5 minutes to sever the remaining steel. A breached door meant an execution squad. 2 men with ballistic shields would step into the opening, allowing a dozen rifles to fire from behind cover and turn the concrete box into a meat grinder. Shifting his gaze, Mercer looked at the rear wall. A steel ventilation grate sat 10 feet above the floor, filtering a pale square of moonlight through its rusted slats. He grabbed an empty wooden pallet and dragged the heavy wood to the rear wall, stacking a second and third on top to build a crude staircase. Vance watched the construction. "You intend to squeeze through the vent?" "The grate measures 12 inches across," Mercer stated, climbing the makeshift stairs. "I intend to change the lighting." His right knee ground against the steel pins as he climbed, but he swallowed the groan and reached the top pallet. He stood tall, pressing his face against the rusted iron grate to get a clear view over the steel door. 2 armored SUVs idled 50 yards from the magazine. Roof-mounted LED light bars blasted pure white illumination against the concrete structure, washing out the surrounding desert and blinding anyone looking out while providing perfect visibility for the Sicarios. 5 men stood behind the open doors of the lead SUV, aiming their rifles at the bunker. Another man pressed a heavy concrete saw against the bottom hinge of the magazine door, bathing his boots in a stream of sparks. Raul Bispo stood behind the second SUV wearing a tailored beige suit, observing the operation with the detached calm of a project manager inspecting a construction site. Mercer pushed the barrel of the Colt Commander through a gap in the iron grate and braced the heavy frame against the rusted metal. He closed his left eye, focused the front sight on the glaring white rectangle atop the lead SUV, and squeezed the trigger. The .45 caliber slug shattered the polycarbonate lens, exploding the left side of the light bar and raining sparks down on the hood. Half the illumination died instantly. The Sicarios flinched and pointed their rifles at the roof of the magazine, searching for the shooter. Mercer fired again. The second round annihilated the rest of the light array. He shifted his aim to the second SUV and pulled the trigger twice, letting the heavy bullets destroy the remaining light bar and plunge the street into absolute blackness. The sudden transition from blinding light to total dark ruined the Sicarios' night vision. Their retinas retained the ghost image of the white glare, forcing them to fire blind. Bullets hammered the thick concrete walls of the magazine, chipping the exterior and creating harmless craters in the poured stone. One bullet struck the edge of the ventilation grate, sending a piece of red-hot shrapnel stinging into Mercer's cheek. He ducked below the sight line. Outside, the concrete saw stopped as the operator released the throttle. The resulting silence felt heavier than the gunfire. Shouts erupted in the darkness, mixing Spanish curses with panicked orders. "Hold your fire!" Bispo roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Secure the perimeter and switch to thermal." Mercer climbed down the wooden pallets, hit the concrete floor, and wiped a drop of blood from his cheek. Vance stood pressed against the side wall, aiming the orange flare gun at the door. "You destroyed their lights," Vance noted. The tremble left his voice, replaced by a cold focus. "I leveled the playing field," Mercer corrected. They switch to thermal optics now to look for heat signatures, which gives them an advantage in the open. But thermal optics fail to penetrate 3 feet of poured concrete. They resume cutting the door soon. They cut the door in the dark, Mercer said. They enter a pitch-black room where their thermal goggles detect our body heat, but those goggles offer terrible depth perception in enclosed spaces. Mercer unzipped the canvas tool bag in the dark, relying on touch to feel the cold metal shapes. He pulled out a heavy coil of braided steel cable, the winch line from the dead Silverado, and thrust the steel loop into Vance's chest. "Take the end of this cable," Mercer commanded. "Walk to the corner and hold the line tight, keeping it 2 feet off the floor." Vance limped to the far corner and pulled the cable taut. Mercer backed into the opposite corner, anchored his end of the steel line around a heavy iron pipe protruding from the wall, and pulled the slack out of the wire to stretch a tripwire across the threshold. Outside, the motorized saw roared back to life. The diamond blade bit into the bottom hinge, sending sparks illuminating through the cracks around the heavy steel door. "When the door falls, the shield men enter first," Mercer instructed. "They trip over the wire and drop the shields. You fire the magnesium flare into the ceiling above their heads." "The ceiling?" Vance asked. "The burning magnesium drips like white-hot rain," Mercer explained. "It burns through Kevlar and flesh, creating a massive thermal bloom that blinds their goggles. Once you fire, drop the plastic gun and swing the iron pipe." The bottom hinge snapped, echoing like a gunshot through the bunker. The saw operator moved the blade to the final middle hinge. The metal groaned, and the heavy door shifted in its frame. Mercer drew the Glock 22, holding the polymer weapon in his right hand and the Colt Commander in his left. He rested his shoulders against the cold concrete corner and leveled both barrels at the center of the doorway. The smell of vaporized steel filled the bunker as the sparks intensified and the final hinge screamed under the immense friction. "Brace yourself, Deputy," Mercer said. The blade severed the last piece of iron, and the saw engine died. The heavy steel door tipped forward, crashing onto the concrete floor of the magazine with an impact that shook the foundation and sent dust pluming into the air. The open doorway framed the night sky, and 2 massive black shapes carrying heavy ballistic shields stepped into the breach, their green laser sights sweeping the darkness for targets. Chapter 14. The heavy boots of the shield bearers hit the concrete floor, stepping over the fallen steel door. Green laser sights sliced through the pitch-black air, seeking body heat. The lead man pushed forward, driving his ballistic shield like a battering ram, and his shin caught the braided steel cable. The tripwire held fast. The sudden resistance pitched the heavy operator forward, stripping his balance and sending him crashing to his knees. The edge of his shield hit the floor, exposing his head and shoulders. The second man stumbled over his fallen partner, creating a chaotic tangle of limbs and tactical gear in the fatal funnel of the doorway. "Fire!" Mercer yelled. Julian Vance pulled the trigger on the orange plastic gun. The 12-gauge magnesium flare erupted from the barrel with a deafening pop, streaking across the dark bunker and striking the concrete ceiling above the tangled sicarios. The chemical payload ignited, burning at 3,000 degrees and casting a blinding, demonic red glare over the room. White-hot slag dripped from the ceiling like liquid sun, splashing against Kevlar helmets and tactical vests. The intense thermal bloom overloaded the sicarios' night vision goggles, turning their visual feeds into a searing white static that burned their retinas. Screams of pain and pure panic bounced off the thick walls as the men clawed at their faces, desperate to rip the heavy optic rigs off their heads. Mercer stepped out from his corner, raised both handguns, and squeezed the triggers. The Colt Commander and the Glock 22 roared in a staggered rhythm, ejecting brass casings that clattered against the stone floor. He aimed for the exposed gaps in their armor, putting rounds into shoulders, thighs, and unprotected necks. The 2 men convulsed under the impacts and collapsed onto the fallen steel door, their blood mixing with the dust. Outside the bunker, Raul Bispo shouted a command. A new squad of sicarios rushed the opening, laying down a wall of blind suppression fire. Automatic rifles chewed the interior of the magazine, sending concrete shrapnel flying in every direction. Mercer dove to the floor, sliding on his chest to reach Vance. The accountant, huddled in a fetal position behind a stack of rotted wooden pallets, clutching the iron lug wrench to his chest as bullets disintegrated the top layer of wood above his head. "They possess infinite ammunition," Vance shouted over the deafening roar of the gunfire. "The flare burns out in 60 seconds. They switch back to thermal optics and shoot us through the smoke." Mercer scanned the rear of the bunker, his eyes sweeping the debris illuminated by the sputtering red flare. He spotted a massive, rusted steel cylinder bolted to the far wall. Faded yellow stenciling marked the tank, industrial refrigerant, compressed. The mining company used the chemical to supercool drill bits to prevent metal fatigue deep in the copper shafts. A thick brass valve sat atop the heavy cylinder. "Cover your ears and close your eyes," Mercer commanded, grabbing a spare magazine from his belt and reloading the Glock by pure touch. "You intend to detonate a bomb?" Vance asked, panic tightening his throat. "I intend to change the weather," Mercer said. He crawled across the floor, keeping his body flat against the cold concrete as rifle rounds screamed inches above his back. He reached a position 10 feet from the heavy yellow cylinder. The flare on the ceiling began to dim, sputtering as it consumed the last of the magnesium. The blinding thermal interference faded, giving the cartel operators outside a clear view of the interior heat signatures. Mercer raised the Colt Commander, gripped the polymer handle with both hands, and aimed at the brass valve assembly on the top of the refrigerant tank. He pulled the trigger 3 times. The heavy slugs struck the brittle brass, shearing the valve from the steel tank. A deafening hiss overpowered the sound of the cartel gunfire. The pressurized industrial refrigerant escaped the ruptured cylinder in a violent rush, expanding from a compressed liquid into a gas. The rapid chemical expansion absorbed all the ambient heat in the room, dropping the temperature of the bunker from 70 degrees to -40 in a matter of seconds. A dense, swirling cloud of sub-zero white fog exploded across the floor, thick as snow, burying Mercer and Vance in an opaque blanket of freezing vapor. Ice crystals formed on the concrete walls, and the ambient moisture in the air froze solid. Outside the doorway, the sicarios adjusted their thermal goggles, searching the smoke for the glowing orange shapes of human bodies. Instead, their screens registered a massive, impenetrable wall of pitch black. The freezing refrigerant masked every trace of body heat in the room, rendering the advanced optical equipment useless. "They ceased firing," Vance whispered, his teeth chattering as the freezing fog soaked through his ruined dress shirt. "They face a blind spot," Mercer explained, his breath pluming in the icy air. "They depend on technology. We take the technology away, they hesitate." Mercer stood up, letting the dense white fog conceal his silhouette from the open doorway. He holstered the empty Colt and gripped the Glock 22 tight. The freezing metal bit into his bare palm. He reached down, grabbed Vance by the collar of his shirt, and hauled the shivering accountant to his feet. "The fog hugs the floor and bleeds out the door," Mercer said, pointing toward the exit. "We follow the cloud. We use it as a shield. We push through their line before the temperature normalizes." Vance gripped the iron lug wrench, his knuckles white from the cold and the fear. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. Mercer stepped toward the doorway, disappearing into the blinding white mist, leading the charge out of the frozen tomb and toward the waiting guns of the cartel. Chapter 15. The sub-zero vapor poured over the lip of the fallen steel door. It cascaded into the desert night like a heavy white waterfall. Mercer Sample stepped over the twisted metal. He kept his body low. He let the freezing fog swallow his silhouette. Ice crystals formed on his eyelashes. The sudden temperature shock punched the breath from his lungs. Julian Vance followed close behind. The accountant clutched the back of Mercer's denim jacket. He shook from the extreme cold. The ruined white dress shirt offered zero insulation against the manufactured blizzard. Blind suppression fire chewed the concrete facade above their heads. The sicarios fired into the opaque cloud. They guessed at targets. Panic squeezed their triggers. Bullets sparked off the stone, showering the courtyard in sharp, hot splinters. Mercer navigated by memory. He pictured the layout of the dirt courtyard outside the magazine. He aimed for the skeletal remains of the assay office, 50 yards to their left. A dark shape loomed in the white mist. A cartel operator wearing thermal goggles stumbled forward. The man lowered his rifle and tried to wipe the condensation from his optic lenses. The extreme cold blinded the expensive equipment. Mercer raised the Glock 22. He pressed the polymer frame against his ribcage. He pulled the trigger twice. The .40 caliber rounds struck the operator in the chest plate. The heavy slugs knocked the man backward into the fog. His rifle clattered against the hardpan. Mercer pushed forward. He dragged Vance through the freezing cloud. The air smelled of vaporized freon and copper blood. A desert crosswind swept down from the canyon ridge. The sudden gust caught the heavy white fog. It tore the artificial cloud apart. It shredded the freezing cover into thin wisps. The moonlight washed over the courtyard. The concealment vanished. Contact left, a voice screamed in Spanish. 3 sicarios flanked the fading vapor trail. They raised their rifles. Mercer shoved Vance behind the rusted husk of a mining cart, half buried in the dirt. Bullets sparked against the heavy iron rim. Mercer returned fire. He snapped 2 shots from the Glock to force the shooters behind the armored doors of the remaining SUV. A 4th man flanked them from the blind side. He bypassed Mercer and lunged for the accountant. The operator slammed his shoulder into Vance's ribs. The impact threw Vance to the dirt. The iron lug wrench slipped from his frozen fingers. It skidded out of reach across the gravel. Mercer swung the Glock toward the attacker. The slide locked back. Empty. He dropped the useless polymer frame. He reached for the Colt Commander. The slide on the heavy .45 locked back as well. He lacked ammunition for both weapons. Automatic fire erupted from the ridge. A sniper positioned on the high ground opened up. The heavy caliber rounds tore chunks of dirt and rock from the ground at Mercer's boots. The incoming fire forced Mercer to dive behind a crumbling brick wall. He hit the dirt. He separated himself from Vance by 30 yards of open, bullet-swept ground. The cold desert grit scraped his face. He tasted pulverized limestone. He heard the heavy boots of the sicarios crunching on the gravel. The operator grabbed Vance by the hair. He dragged the accountant across the sharp rocks. Vance kicked his legs. His ruined dress shoes found zero purchase in the dirt. 2 more sicarios rushed forward. They wore heavy tactical vests, packed with spare rifle magazines. They grabbed the accountant's arms. They hoisted him off his feet. They hauled him toward the idling SUVs. The massive V8 engines rumbled, spitting thick clouds of diesel exhaust into the cold night air. The stench of unburned fuel mixed with the lingering odor of the refrigerant gas. Mercer pressed his back against the cold bricks of the ruined wall. He ejected the empty magazines from his weapons. He pressed his thumb into his pockets. 0 rounds remained. He owned 2 chunks of dead metal. He peered around the jagged edge of the wall. He needed an equalizer. He dropped his gaze to the debris at his feet. Rusted nails scattered across the dirt. Broken glass reflected the moonlight. A length of heavy iron rebar protruded from a crumbled section of mortar. Mercer gripped the iron with both hands. He braced his leather boot against the bricks and pulled. The rebar slid free with a harsh scrape. 2 feet of solid, rusted steel. He weighed the iron in his palm. It offered terrible reach against automatic rifles, but it crushed bone on impact. He tightened his grip. He planned his approach. He needed a distraction. Raul Bispo stepped into the illuminated zone near the SUVs. The cartel enforcer smoothed the lapels of his beige suit. He observed his men dragging the accountant to the front bumper. They threw Vance onto his knees. The sharp gravel cut into the tailored charcoal trousers. Bispo walked forward. He possessed the relaxed gait of a man inspecting a warehouse delivery. Vance kept his head down. He stared at the dust. His chest heaved. "You run a terrible marathon, Julian," Bispo stated. He stopped 2 feet from the kneeling man. "You ruin expensive clothing. You test my patience. You cost me excellent contractors." Vance remained silent. He wrapped his arms around his torso to fight the lingering chill of the refrigerant fog. "The ex-marshal sits behind a wall with empty weapons," Bispo continued. He raised his voice to ensure the sound carried across the dead town. "He lacks the capacity to intervene. The contract expires. The audit concludes." Bispo reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He withdrew a small plastic evidence bag. He held the bag up to the moonlight. Inside the transparent plastic rested the shattered remains of a pair of tortoiseshell Tom Ford sunglasses. The lenses featured a spiderweb of cracks. One arm hung by a twisted wire hinge. Vance looked up. The color drained from his face. "My men exercise extreme discipline," Bispo explained. "They combed the wreckage of the transport van. They sifted the dirt. They located your discarded eyewear. A technician in Phoenix possesses a microscope. He identified the 12-word seed phrase etched into the inner frame." Bispo dropped the plastic bag onto the hood of the SUV. He rested his hand on the leather-wrapped handle of the machete sheathed at his hip. "I possess the keys to the offshore accounts," Bispo said. "The blockchain surrenders the $50 million to my control. Your leverage evaporated. Your value zeroed out." Vance stared at the crushed sunglasses. A strange sound escaped his throat. A dry, hacking cough broke the silence. The cough morphed into a low chuckle. The chuckle built into a harsh, hysterical laugh. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, sharp and unhinged. The sicarios shifted their weight. They adjusted the slings on their rifles. They exchanged confused glances. Bispo narrowed his eyes. The laughter insulted his authority. It violated the established script of a cartel execution. "You find humor in your execution," Bispo noted. Vance stopped laughing. He wiped a mixture of tears and soot from his eyes. He looked up at the enforcer. The terror vanished. The arrogant sneer of the corporate boardroom replaced the fear. "You possess 12 words," Vance said. "You lack the fundamental understanding of smart contracts." "Explain the technicality," Bispo demanded. He unclipped the retention strap on his machete sheath. The leather snapped loud in the quiet air. "Speak plain English." "I moved the $50 million into a decentralized liquidity pool," Vance detailed. His voice found a steady, confident rhythm. He reverted to the man who dictated terms from a glass-walled office in Manhattan. "I established a time-locked protocol. A dead man's switch written into the core architecture of the Ethereum blockchain. The contract requires a cryptographic ping from my specific, authenticated IP address every 24 hours. It demands proof of life." Bispo stared down at the accountant. The enforcer's jaw muscles clenched, creating hard knots under his skin. "I authorized The final ping yesterday afternoon, Vance continued. The countdown initiated right then. If the contract fails to receive the authentication key, the protocol executes a burn function. The code assumes my capture or death. The funds transfer to an unrecoverable, null address. The money evaporates. It becomes permanent, digital dust. You invent lies to preserve your skin. Check your watch, Raul, Vance challenged. The 24-hour window expires at midnight. You possess the seed phrase. You possess the wallet access. Open the ledger on your satellite terminal right now. Watch the balance. Bispo snapped his fingers at the SUV driver. Bring the terminal. The driver scrambled into the back seat. He emerged with a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook. He placed the heavy laptop on the hood next to the plastic bag. The screen glowed. It displayed a complex sequence of alphanumeric codes and a digital wallet interface. Bispo typed a series of commands. He referenced the micro-etched words from a notepad in his pocket. He hit the Enter key. The screen refreshed. A green number appeared at the top of the interface. $50 million, .00 United States dollars. The funds remain, Bispo declared. He rested his hand on the machete handle again. You construct ghost stories, Julian. Vance checked the analog clock on the dashboard. He viewed the dial through the SUV windshield. The minute hand clicked upward. Wait 10 seconds, Vance instructed. Mercer watched from the brick ruins. He tightened his grip on the rusted rebar. He waited for the distraction to peak. He needed all eyes on that computer screen. The digital clock on the Panasonic screen ticked over to 00. Midnight. The green numbers flashed. A script executed on the screen. The code cascaded in a rapid waterfall of white text, wiping the previous balance sheet clean. The total balance updated. $0.00 United States dollars. Bispo stared at the screen. The green glow illuminated a face, frozen in absolute disbelief. The enforcer tapped the refresh key with a heavy finger. The screen flickered. The 0 remained. He hit the key again, harder this time. The null address confirmed the receipt of the funds. The vault sealed itself forever. $50 million vanished into the ether. The ledger closed, Vance stated. He tilted his chin up. He exposed his throat to the enforcer. He embraced the inevitable. You spent 4 men, 2 vehicles, and an entire night to capture a 0 balance. Your business trip concludes right here. Chapter 16. Mercer Sample pressed his spine against the crumbling brick wall and listened to the silence drop over the courtyard. The rhythmic chug of the idling SUV engines filled the void left by the gunfire. $50 million vanished, and the shock paralyzed the cartel execution squad. Mercer reached into the front pocket of his denim jeans. His calloused fingers brushed past the useless titanium drive and closed around the black plastic burner phone he took from the superintendent's desk. He pulled the device free. The screen cast a harsh blue glare against his palm. He unlocked the device, bypassing the non-existent security features of a disposable phone, and opened the call registry. He scrolled through the recent contacts. A single number dominated the outgoing and incoming logs. The prefix belonged to a Mexican country code. Sinaloa. He pressed the green call icon. He raised the plastic speaker to his ear. The line rang 3 times. A heavy click signaled the connection. Ice clinked against glass in the background, accompanied by the faint brassy rhythm of a distant narco corrido. Raul, a deep voice rasped. The tone carried absolute authority, a man accustomed to blind obedience. Report the recovery. Raul holds a machete, Mercer spoke into the receiver. He kept his voice flat, pitching the baritone to cut through the static of the cellular connection. He holds the accountant. He lacks the money. The music in the background muted. A chair scraped across a hard floor. Identify yourself, the voice demanded. I possess the name Mercer Sample. I carry the federal transport contract for Julian Vance. Your enforcer ambushed my vehicle. He caused a massive disturbance in the organ pipe territory. He burned a motel to the ground. He expended thousands of rounds of ammunition. The expenses matter zero, the cartel boss countered. The $50 million matter. Put Raul on the line. Raul stands 50 yards away, staring at a Panasonic laptop, Mercer explained. He watches the account balance drop to zero. Julian Vance established a dead man switch on the blockchain. The contract required a daily authentication ping. Raul isolated the accountant in a dead zone and severed his communication. The 24-hour timer expired 3 minutes ago. The protocol executed a burn function. Silence stretched across the international network. The boss processed the intelligence. He understood the permanence of a cryptocurrency burn function. The funds evaporated, the boss asked, his voice dropping an octave into a lethal register. The funds became digital ash, Mercer confirmed. Your director of asset recovery chased a ghost. He pushed the timeline and triggered the security protocol. His incompetence cost your organization $50 million. Mercer lowered the phone from his ear. He pressed the speakerphone icon. He tapped the volume rocker, maximizing the audio output. He stepped out from the shadows of the brick ruins. He gripped the 2-foot length of rusted iron rebar in his right hand. He held the glowing burner phone in his left. He walked out of the dark, dragging his boots across the gravel to announce his approach. The sicarios snapped their rifles toward the sound. 5 muzzles tracked Mercer's chest. Green laser sights danced across his faded denim jacket. Hold! Raul Bispo barked. The enforcer stood beside the SUV hood. His corporate calm shattered completely. A vein pulsed thick and dark against his temple. He gripped the leather-wrapped handle of his machete, his knuckles white with suppressed rage. He stared at Mercer, trying to comprehend the suicidal advance of an unarmed man. Mercer stopped 10 feet from the armored bumper. Julian Vance kneeled in the dirt between them, shivering in the cold air, his ruined white shirt clinging to his ribs. Mercer tossed the burner phone. The plastic device arced through the air and landed on the steel hood of the SUV, sliding to a halt next to the ruggedized Panasonic laptop. The call remained active. Your manager desires a status report, Mercer announced. Bispo stared at the phone. He recognized his own device. He recognized the heavy, rhythmic breathing coming through the amplified speaker. Patron, Bispo stammered. He leaned toward the hood. The polished veneer of the businessman vanished, replaced by the terror of a subordinate facing a firing squad. The accountant utilized a trick. He utilized a hidden program. You assured me of a clean extraction, the voice roared from the tiny speaker. The volume crackled, distorting the audio. You assured me the funds remained secure in the ledger drive. You spent my men and my resources to secure an empty vault. I possess the accountant, Bispo pleaded. He drew the machete from its leather sheath. The long curved blade caught the moonlight. I extract the penalty from his flesh. I send you the recording. The accountant holds zero value, the boss spat. His blood replaces nothing. You lost $50 million, Raul. You humiliated the organization. You operate a deficit. The sicarios exchanged nervous glances. They lowered their rifles a fraction of an inch. Their loyalty belonged to the voice on the phone, the man holding the purse strings in Sinaloa, not the middle manager standing in the Arizona dirt. "I salvaged the operation," Bispo begged, his voice cracking. He pointed the machete at Mercer. "I eliminate the federal agent. I clean the scene." "You clean nothing," the boss commanded. The decree carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. "You return to Mexico. You face the auditors. Any man standing beside you shares your deficit. The contract on the accountant terminates." The line went dead. A dial tone hissed from the speaker. Mercer watched the sicarios digest the order. The cartel logic clicked into place inside their minds. Bispo represented a walking corpse. The boss marked the enforcer for death. Defending a dead man offered zero profit and guaranteed execution. The lead sicario took a step backward. He lowered the barrel of his AR-15 until the muzzle pointed at the dirt. The other 4 men mirrored the action. They slung their rifles over their shoulders. They stepped away from the SUVs, distancing themselves from Raul Bispo. "Get in the vehicles," Bispo ordered them. He waved the machete at the men. "We eliminate these 2 and drive south. Obey your orders." The lead sicario spat a thick glob of saliva onto the gravel. He turned his back on Bispo and walked into the darkness, abandoning the operation. The rest of the squad followed him, fading into the desert night, leaving their former commander alone in the center of the dead town. Bispo stared at the empty space where his army stood seconds ago. His chest heaved. The calculated predator died, leaving a cornered, rabid animal in his place. He turned his eyes toward Julian Vance. "You ruined my ledger," Bispo snarled. He raised the machete high above his head, stepping forward to cleave the accountant's skull in half. Mercer lunged. He swung the rusted iron rebar like a baseball bat, aiming for Bispo's ribs. The heavy steel connected with a sickening crunch. Bispo grunted, stumbling sideways. The machete blow went wide, the blade burying itself an inch deep into the steel hood of the SUV, sparking against the metal. Mercer grabbed Vance by the collar, hauling the accountant off his knees. "Move," Mercer shouted. He dragged Vance away from the vehicles, pushing him toward the massive, looming silhouette of the copper smelter at the edge of the courtyard. The ruined industrial building resembled a dark, skeletal cathedral, complete with towering smokestacks that pierced the night sky like rusted steeples. Bispo ripped the machete free from the truck hood. He let out a feral scream and charged after them, his beige suit flapping in the wind, the blade held low and ready to gut them. Mercer and Vance hit the massive open doorway of the smelter. They plunged into the cavernous interior. The moonlight sliced through massive holes in the corrugated tin roof, illuminating a maze of catwalks, huge iron smelting vats, and hanging chains thick as a man's arm. The air smelled of ancient sulfur and pulverized slag. Mercer pushed Vance behind a brick support column. He turned to face the entrance. Raul Bispo stepped into the cathedral of dust. The enforcer locked his eyes on Mercer. He tapped the flat side of the machete blade against his thigh, creating a rhythmic, metallic ring that echoed through the massive iron chamber. "No army," Mercer called out, his voice bouncing off the high tin ceiling. "No rifles. Just the ledger." Bispo tightened his grip on the handle. He stepped into a shaft of moonlight, his face twisted into a mask of pure murder. "I balance the books with your blood," Bispo whispered. The final audit moved into the shadows of the rusted iron beasts, a primal contest stripped of all modern advantages, leaving only the sharp edge of a blade and the heavy blunt force of a steel bar. Chapter 17. Shadows consumed the interior of the copper smelter, creating a labyrinth of rusted iron and broken concrete. Moonlight sliced through the collapsed sections of the corrugated tin roof, projecting harsh geometric shapes against the dirt floor. Massive smelting vats hung suspended from the ceiling by thick iron chains, resembling dormant iron giants waiting for a spark. The air held the bitter, metallic tang of oxidized copper and decades of undisturbed dust. Mercer Sample backed into the gloom, gripping the 2-foot length of rusted rebar in his right hand. He guided Julian Vance behind a thick brick support column, shoving the accountant into the deep darkness. "Stay quiet," Mercer commanded, his chest heaving as he dragged oxygen into his burning lungs. "Keep the iron wrench ready. He comes for me first." Raul Bispo stepped through the massive arched doorway, his silhouette stark against the desert night behind him. The cartel enforcer held the machete low, the curved steel blade catching the ambient moonlight. His beige suit, once a symbol of corporate detachment, now hung torn and stained with grease from the SUV hood. The calculated businessman vanished entirely, leaving a man stripped of his empire, his army, and his future. "You hide in the dark," Bispo called out, his voice bouncing off the high tin ceiling and echoing through the cavernous space. "You delay the inevitable. The patron demands a blood sacrifice to balance the ledger. I intend to provide too." Mercer stepped out from behind the brick column, placing his body between the enforcer and the accountant. He raised the heavy iron rebar, pointing the jagged, rusted tip at Bispo's chest. "The patron fired you," Mercer stated, keeping his tone flat and devoid of emotion. "He abandoned you in the desert. You own zero authority, Raul. You chase a ghost." Bispo snarled, a feral sound that ripped through the silence of the dead factory. He lunged forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed. He swung the machete in a wide, horizontal arc aimed at Mercer's neck. Mercer stepped inside the swing, raising the rebar to block the blow. Steel clashed against iron. Sparks erupted in the dark. The sheer kinetic force of the impact shuddered down Mercer's arms, vibrating his teeth and jarring his shoulder sockets. Bispo recovered instantly, reversing his grip and bringing the blade up in a vicious diagonal slash. Mercer backpedaled, but the tip of the machete caught the heavy denim of his jacket, slicing through the fabric and carving a shallow line across his ribs. Warm blood soaked into Mercer's undershirt. Mercer ignored the sting, stepping into Bispo's guard and thrusting the blunt end of the rebar like a spear. The iron struck Bispo in the sternum. The blow knocked the breath from the enforcer's lungs, forcing him to stumble backward against a rusted control panel. "You swing heavy iron," Bispo wheezed, rubbing his chest. "But you move like an old man. You favor your right leg. I see the weakness." Bispo pushed off the control panel and attacked again, changing his angles, aiming low to exploit the damaged knee. He unleashed a flurry of rapid slashes, forcing Mercer to retreat deeper into the smelter. Mercer parried the strikes, letting the rebar absorb the punishing impacts. He utilized the cramped environment, maneuvering Bispo between two massive iron vats to restrict the enforcer's swinging radius. The long, curved machete required open space to generate maximum velocity. The tight quarters forced Bispo to rely on short, choppy strikes, neutralizing his primary advantage. Julian Vance watched the brutal melee from his hiding spot behind the brick column. He gripped the heavy iron lug wrench in his hands, his knuckles turning white under the strain. He watched Mercer bleed. He watched the older man absorb brutal punishment to keep the blade away from him. A stark realization hit the accountant. No police cruisers raced toward San Felice. No federal helicopters chopped through the night sky to extract them. The corporate world of lawyers, injunctions, and offshore loopholes ceased to exist within these crumbling brick walls. Survival required physical action. Survival demanded blood. Mercer and Bispo continued their violent dance, their boots clanging against a rusted steel staircase leading up to a grated catwalk. Bispo pressed the offensive, driving Mercer up the steps. Mercer climbed, his bad knee grinding with every upward thrust. He reached the catwalk, a narrow iron bridge suspended 30 feet above the central floor. Directly beneath the grating sat the primary slag pit, a massive concrete basin filled with jagged chunks of hardened, glass-like industrial waste. A fall into the pit guaranteed a broken spine or impalement on the sharp refuse. Bispo crested the stairs, his eyes burning with absolute malice. He feinted high with the machete, then drove the toe of his expensive leather shoe directly into Mercer's right kneecap. The 3 steel pins inside the joint screamed under the impact. Mercer's leg buckled instantly. The white-hot agony blinded him for a fraction of a second, dropping him to his left knee on the rusted grating. He dropped the iron rebar. The heavy tool clattered through the gaps in the catwalk and plummeted into the dark pit below. Bispo stood over the kneeling ex-marshal, raising the machete high above his head with both hands. He intended to split Mercer's skull down the center. "The audit concludes," Bispo announced, savoring the kill. A shadow moved on the stairs behind the enforcer. Julian Vance stepped onto the catwalk. He abandoned his corporate cowardice, gripping the iron lug wrench with desperate purpose. He lunged forward, swinging the heavy steel bar like a golf club, aiming for the back of Bispo's left leg. The heavy iron connected with the back of Bispo's knee. The joint shattered with a sickening crunch. Bispo screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. His leg collapsed, sending him crashing onto the steel grating beside Mercer. The machete slipped from his grasp, sliding across the rusted metal and dropping off the edge of the catwalk into the abyss. Vance stood over the fallen enforcer, panting, staring at the iron wrench in his hands. He actually struck a man. He altered the outcome. Bispo writhed on the grating, clutching his ruined leg. His pristine beige suit soaked up the rust and grime. The pain stripped away his remaining sanity, leaving nothing but venom. He reached a trembling hand behind his back, sliding his fingers under the tailored fabric of his jacket. He gripped the polymer handle of a backup weapon holstered at the small of his back. He pulled a compact Smith & Wesson snub-nose revolver free, thumbing the hammer back and aiming the short barrel at Vance's chest. Mercer lunged from his kneeling position. He grabbed the cylinder of the revolver with his left hand, locking his thick fingers over the rotating mechanism to prevent the next chamber from aligning with the barrel. He grabbed Bispo's wrist with his right hand, twisting the joint outward with brutal bone-snapping force. Bispo shrieked and fought the grip, but Mercer utilized the leverage of his entire upper body. He forced the barrel of the revolver away from Vance, turning the muzzle back toward the enforcer's own chest. Mercer released the cylinder. The internal spring rotated the chamber. He squeezed Bispo's hand, forcing the enforcer's finger against the trigger. The revolver roared, a deafening blast in the enclosed industrial space. A bright muzzle flash illuminated the catwalk, casting harsh shadows against the tin ceiling. The heavy .38 caliber hollow point struck Raul Bispo directly under the chin, severing his brain stem and exiting through the top of his skull. The enforcer's eyes went blank instantly. The explosive kinetic force of the point-blank gunshot threw his body backward. Bispo smashed through the rusted iron railing of the catwalk. The brittle metal snapped under his weight. His body tumbled into the darkness, arms flailing wildly in the empty air, plummeting 30 feet down. A heavy, wet crunch echoed from the concrete basin below, as Bispo struck the jagged sea of hardened slag. Silence rushed back into the cathedral of dust, broken only by the sound of Mercer's ragged breathing and the wind whistling through the holes in the roof. Mercer pulled himself up using the surviving section of the railing. He put no weight on his right leg. He stared down into the black pit, confirming the kill. The director of asset recovery lay twisted and broken among the industrial waste, another piece of dead weight discarded in the desert. He turned his head and looked at Julian Vance. The accountant stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Bispo fell, his chest heaving, the iron wrench still gripped tight in his hands. "You throw a decent swing," Mercer said, wiping the sweat from his eyes. Vance dropped the lug wrench. The metal clanged against the grating. He looked at his shaking hands, then looked at Mercer. "I prefer spreadsheets," Vance whispered. "Spreadsheets bleed less," Mercer agreed. He unbuttoned his torn denim jacket and checked the shallow cut on his ribs. He applied pressure with his palm to slow the bleeding. He looked toward the massive arched doorway of the smelter. The moonlight painted a silver path across the dirt floor leading out of the dead town. The cartel army retreated. The enforcer rotted in a pit. The $50 million ceased to exist. The ledger finally achieved balance. Mercer limped toward the top of the stairs, favoring his good leg, leaning heavily on the handrail. "Let us find a working vehicle," Mercer commanded, starting the slow descent. "I need a cup of coffee. I need a mechanic." Chapter 18. Mercer Sample descended the rusted iron staircase, one agonizing step at a time, keeping his entire weight on his left leg. His right knee throbbed, sending sharp spikes of white-hot agony up his thigh and into his lower spine with every movement. He gripped the metal handrail tight enough to turn his knuckles white, using his upper body strength to lower himself toward the dirt floor of the smelter. Julian Vance followed 3 steps behind, limping on his twisted ankle. The accountant kept his eyes fixed on the rusted grating beneath his ruined leather shoes, refusing to look back toward the dark abyss of the slag pit. The violent crack of the .38 caliber revolver still echoed in his ears, leaving a high-pitched ring that drowned out the howling desert wind. They reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped off the iron structure onto the pulverized slag and dirt. The massive, cavernous interior of the ruined industrial plant felt colder than the open desert. Shadows stretched long and deep between the brick support columns, hiding the debris of a dead century. Mercer stopped and leaned his shoulder against a concrete pylon to catch his breath. He unbuttoned his torn denim jacket, pulled the fabric aside, and inspected his ribcage. The machete strike carved a shallow, jagged trench through his undershirt and into his flesh. Warm blood flowed freely down his flank, soaking the leather of his heavy gun belt. He pressed his left palm flat against the wound, applying direct pressure to stem the bleeding. "We require medical attention," Vance stated, staring at the dark stain spreading across Mercer's fingers. "We require a vehicle," Mercer corrected. He pushed off the concrete pylon and limped toward the massive arched doorway. The pale moonlight painted a silver rectangle on the dirt, guiding them out of the dark cathedral and back into the cold night air of the courtyard. The ghost town of San Felice sat in absolute silence. The cartel sicarios abandoned their posts, fleeing south to escape the wrath of their superiors in Sinaloa. They left their dead scattered across the hardpan and abandoned 2 armored Chevrolet Tahoes idling in the center of the dirt square. The heavy V8 engines rumbled, spitting white exhaust plumes into the freezing pre-dawn air. Mercer approached the nearest black SUV. The vehicle bore the scars of the siege. A .45 caliber slug shattered the driver's side window, leaving a jagged frame of safety glass, and the roof-mounted light bar hung in ruined plastic shards. He opened the heavy armored door and slid into the driver's seat. He checked the instrument cluster. A full tank of gas registered on the analog dial. The keys dangled from the ignition cylinder. The cartel operators left in a panic, prioritizing speed over equipment retention. Mercer reached across the center console and popped the latch on the glove compartment. He rummaged through the stacked vehicle registration papers and spare pistol magazines until his fingers brushed a square plastic box. He pulled out a red first aid kit, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and killed the engine to conserve fuel. He grabbed the plastic box and stepped out of the cabin, closing the heavy armored door behind him. Vance sat on the steel front bumper of the Tahoe. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around his shins in a desperate attempt to conserve body heat. The manufactured blizzard inside the concrete magazine soaked his custom white dress shirt, and the freezing desert wind turned the wet cotton into a layer of ice against his skin. He shivered uncontrollably, his teeth chattering like a telegraph key. Mercer limped to the front of the vehicle and set the red plastic kit on the flat steel expanse of the hood. He popped the plastic clasps, flipped the lid open, and extracted a roll of white gauze and a pair of trauma shears. He cut a thick pad of the cotton material, lifted his bloody undershirt, and pressed the makeshift bandage against his ribs. He wrapped the remaining gauze tight around his torso, pulling the fabric taut to maintain pressure on the machete slice. They left bottles of water in the rear cargo area, Vance noted, pointing a trembling finger toward the back of the SUV. I saw a plastic crate through the window. Mercer secured the bandage, tucking the loose end under the tight wrap. He walked to the rear of the Tahoe, opened the liftgate, and found a shrink-wrapped case of purified drinking water sitting next to a heavy canvas duffel bag filled with spare ammunition. He ripped the plastic wrap, pulled 2 cold bottles free, and closed the hatch. He returned to the front bumper and tossed a plastic bottle into Vance's lap. Vance fumbled with the plastic cap, his numb fingers struggling to break the factory seal. He twisted the plastic free, raised the bottle to his lips, and drank the freezing water in long, desperate gulps. Water spilled down his chin, washing away streaks of black soot and dried red dirt. Mercer unscrewed his own bottle, took 3 measured swallows, and sat down on the heavy steel bumper beside the accountant. He stretched his injured right leg straight out into the gravel, refusing to bend the damaged knee joint. They sat in silence. The eastern horizon began to change. The bruised deep purple of the night sky faded, giving way to a pale metallic gray. The jagged silhouettes of the chimney rock formations emerged from the darkness, cutting sharp black lines against the lightening sky. Dawn approached the borderlands, bringing the promise of brutal heat to burn away the freezing cold. Vance lowered his water bottle. He stared at the gray horizon. He wiped his wet chin with the back of his ruined, soot-stained hand. "I struck him," Vance whispered, breaking the quiet. He looked down at his palms, turning them over, examining the dirt packed under his manicured fingernails. "I swung the iron. I shattered his knee. I initiated the sequence of events that ended his life." "You fought for your life," Mercer said, staring straight ahead at the empty dirt road leading north out of the ghost town. "You chose action over surrender." "I took a life." "You saved a life," Mercer corrected, keeping his tone flat. "Bispo intended to leave 2 corpses in the slag pit. You altered the math." Vance squeezed the plastic water bottle. The thin material crinkled under his grip. The shock of the violence began to recede, replaced by the rapid, calculating hum of his natural instincts. The white-collar predator woke up, surveying the new landscape, searching for an angle. He turned his head and looked at Mercer. The older man sat slumped against the grill of the Tahoe, his face pale, his denim jacket stained dark with fresh blood. Mercer looked exhausted, a battered relic held together by sheer stubbornness and a roll of gauze. "The $50 million ceased to exist," Vance stated, his voice gaining strength, shedding the terrified tremble. "The smart contract burned the funds. The money evaporated into the blockchain." Mercer nodded once. The ledger balanced. "The specific funds evaporated," Vance emphasized, shifting his weight on the steel bumper. "The capital vanished. But the methodology remains intact." Mercer turned his head. He locked his blue eyes on the accountant. He recognized the tone. The salesman returned to the floor, ready to pitch a new venture. "The architecture resides entirely in my head," Vance continued, leaning closer, his eyes flashing with a renewed, frantic energy. "I built the routing protocols. I established the shell corporations in Cyprus. I mapped the entire, decentralized liquidity pool. The cartel utilizes accountants, but they lack architects. I hold the blueprint for an invisible empire." Mercer took another swallow of water. He screwed the cap back onto the bottle. You hold a one-way ticket to a federal holding cell. Consider the reality of our situation, Vance pleaded, gesturing at the empty desert surrounding them. You fulfilled your promise. Raul Bispo resides in a pit. The cartel army retreated. You hold the keys to this vehicle. You possess the capacity to drive away right now. I possess the capacity to drive us to a federal courthouse in Tucson, Mercer said. You deliver a man who owns nothing, Vance countered. The federal prosecutors wanted the $50 million. They wanted the prize. I offer them zero capital. I become a bureaucratic nuisance, a line item on a budget. Vance slid off the bumper. He stood in the dirt, ignoring the pain in his twisted ankle. He paced a tight circle in front of Mercer, his hands moving, emphasizing his points like a man presenting a quarterly earnings report to a hostile board of directors. Let me walk into the desert, Vance proposed. Give me one bottle of water and a 2-hour head start. I hike to the highway. I find a ride to Nogales. I cross the border and disappear. Within 6 months, I rebuild the entire infrastructure. I generate new capital. I structure a new enterprise. Mercer stared at the man. The absolute audacity of the pitch defied logic. They survived a siege, escaped a burning building, and killed a cartel enforcer, yet Vance remained entirely consumed by the phantom digits on a computer screen. The greed ran deeper than the fear. I wire $10 million to any account you choose, Vance offered, stopping his pacing and planting his feet in the gravel. 10 million. Clean. Untraceable. You purchase 10 ranches. You hire the finest orthopedic surgeons in the world to replace that knee. You leave this rusted life behind. The sun crested the jagged peaks of the eastern ridge. A blinding shaft of pure golden light struck the dirt courtyard, painting the rusted ruins of San Felice in brilliant, harsh relief. The sudden light illuminated the blood on Mercer's jacket, and the absolute desperation etched into Vance's soot-stained face. Mercer reached into his pocket. His calloused fingers closed around the heavy titanium ledger drive. He pulled the metal rectangle free and held it up in the morning light. Vance stared at the metal. He shook his head. I explained the reality of that hardware. It contains zero data. It represents a decoy, a hollow prop. It represents the chain of custody, Mercer stated. He tossed the titanium drive. It arced through the cold morning air. Vance instinctively raised his hands and caught the heavy metal rectangle against his chest. I deliver the hardware, Mercer said, grabbing the edge of the steel bumper and hauling his battered frame upright. His right leg screamed, but he locked the joint, refusing to show weakness. I'd deliver the prisoner. I close the contract. You choose poverty, Vance shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. You choose a meager pension and a broken body over generational wealth. You operate without logic. Mercer reached out, grabbed Vance by the collar of his ruined white shirt, and shoved the accountant hard against the passenger door of the armored Tahoe. He pulled the handle, yanked the heavy door open, and forced Vance into the leather seat. I operate on a different currency, Mercer said. He slammed the armored door shut, sealing the accountant inside the cab. The heavy latch engaged with the finality of a prison cell closing. Mercer turned his back on the passenger side and limped around the hood, moving toward the driver's seat to begin the long drive north. Chapter 19. Mercer Sample shifted the armored Tahoe into drive, feeling the heavy transmission engage with a solid clunk. He steered the bullet-riddled SUV out of the dirt courtyard, leaving the rusted cathedral of the copper smelter behind them in the dust. The heavy, mud-terrain tires chewed through the gravel, finding the cracked asphalt of the narrow canyon road. Julian Vance stared out the shattered passenger window. The morning sun baked the desert, reflecting off the red rock formations and cutting through the freezing chill of his soaked dress shirt. The white-collar predator vanished entirely, leaving a hollow shell shivering against the leather seat. He watched the barren landscape roll past, measuring the distance to a prison cell in miles and minutes. Mercer kept the speedometer at a steady 40. The adrenaline drained from his bloodstream, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. His right knee throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a constant reminder of the shattered joint and the steel pins holding his leg together. The makeshift gauze bandage wrapped around his ribs, soaked through with fresh blood, sticking to his undershirt and pulling at his skin with every breath. They passed the smoldering ruins of the Gila Bend Motor Lodge. Blackened timber and melted plastic littered the parking lot. A thin column of gray smoke drifted into the clear blue sky, marking the grave of the cartel breach team. "They intend to bury me in a supermax facility," Vance murmured, breaking the hour-long silence inside the cabin. He kept his eyes fixed on the desert scrub. "The Department of Justice considers me a flight risk. They deny bail. They seize my assets. They lock me in a concrete box for the remainder of my natural life." Mercer kept his hands on the steering wheel. He offered zero sympathy. "You stole $50 million from a drug cartel," Mercer reminded him. "A concrete box guarantees your survival. A prison warden protects you from the surviving members of the Bispo family." They crested a shallow hill, approaching the junction near the burned-out Oasis gas station. A wall of brown dust rose on the northern horizon, obscuring the distant mountains. Red and blue strobe lights pierced the dust cloud, flashing in a chaotic, urgent rhythm. A convoy of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans and a heavy olive-drab Lenco Bearcat armored transport vehicle dominated the 2-lane asphalt. The Federal cavalry moved in a tight, high-speed diamond formation, eating up the miles, closing the gap. Mercer steered the Tahoe onto the gravel shoulder, clearing the center lane. He killed the ignition, dropping the keys onto the cracked plastic dashboard. He unbuckled his seatbelt and rested his empty hands on the top of the steering wheel rim. "The railhead," Mercer announced. The convoy arrived in a storm of noise and grit. The heavy vehicles skidded to a halt, forming a tactical semicircle around the battered Tahoe. Tactical boots hit the asphalt before the wheels stopped rolling. Federal agents swarmed the perimeter, raising short-barreled rifles, centering their red dot sights on the driver and passenger doors. "Kill the engine and keep your hands visible," a voice boomed over a vehicle public address system. "The engine sits dead," Mercer shouted through the shattered window. He kept his hands high. "I possess 0 weapons. I carry the package from the Mile 74 rollover." 2 heavily armed agents approached the passenger side. They yanked the armored door open, grabbed Vance by the shoulders, and hauled the accountant out of the cabin. Vance stumbled onto the asphalt. He straightened his spine, attempting to summon the authority of a Manhattan boardroom. "I demand immediate legal counsel," Vance declared, projecting his voice over the rumble of the idling Bearcat engine. "I possess critical intelligence regarding offshore cartel logistics. I require a direct negotiation with a federal prosecutor before I provide a single syllable of testimony." The 2 agents ignored the pitch. They kicked Vance's legs apart, slammed him against the side of the Tahoe, and secured his wrists with heavy-duty plastic zip ties. The thick plastic bit into his raw skin, a brutal echo of the morning he spent trapped in the crushed transport van. On the driver's side, a man wearing a heavy plate carrier and mirrored Oakley sunglasses stepped out of the dust cloud. The stenciled yellow letters on his chest read, "Senior Inspector." He lowered his rifle, letting the weapon hang from a single-point tactical sling, and approached Mercer's door. "Step out of the vehicle," the inspector commanded. Mercer pushed the heavy armored door open, wincing as the movement pulled the torn flesh on his ribcage. He placed his left boot on the asphalt, dragging his stiff right leg behind him. He leaned against the front fender, letting the heavy steel bear his weight. The inspector surveyed the damage. He examined the shattered light bar, the bullet holes piercing the hood, and the thick layer of soot and blood covering Mercer's denim jacket. "Identify yourself," the inspector ordered. Mercer reached into his back pocket. He moved with deliberate telegraphed motions, ensuring the federal agents surrounding him understood his intentions. He pulled Miller's leather wallet from the denim fabric. He flipped the leather open, exposing the silver star stained with dried blood. He pressed the wallet into the inspector's gloved hand. "Mercer Sample, former deputy marshal," he stated, looking past the mirrored sunglasses and locking eyes with the man behind them. "Marshal Miller died in the ravine. He kept his oath. He protected the cargo until his heart stopped." The inspector stared at the bloody badge. He snapped the leather wallet shut and tucked it into a secure pouch on his tactical vest. The aggression drained from his posture, replaced by the grim professionalism of a man acknowledging the loss of a colleague. "We received a chaotic distress signal from Pima Dispatch," the inspector explained, lowering his voice. "They reported a DOJ transport rollover. They reported localized radio jamming. We mobilized the tactical element from Phoenix. We found the burned van an hour ago. We found the dead sicarios at the motel. We tracked your tire tread south." Mercer reached into his front pocket. He pulled the heavy, titanium ledger drive free. He held the metal rectangle out in his open palm. "The collateral," Mercer said. The inspector took the drive, sealing it inside a plastic evidence bag. "Where is the cartel pursuit element?" the inspector asked, scanning the empty desert horizon to the south. "Where is Raul Bispo?" "Bispo rests at the bottom of a slag pit in San Felice," Mercer answered. "His contractors abandoned the operation. They fled toward the border. You own the territory." The inspector processed the carnage. A single, retired deputy eliminated a high-tier cartel enforcer, decimated a hit squad, and secured a $50 million asset. The logistics defied standard federal debriefing protocols. "We need you in Phoenix," the inspector stated, waving a hand toward the idling Suburbans. "We require a sworn deposition. We require a full tactical breakdown of the siege in San Felice. The Bureau offers a substantial bounty for the confirmed elimination of Raul Bispo. You stand to collect a significant sum." Mercer looked at Julian Vance. The agents marched the accountant toward the armored Bearcat, shoving his head down to clear the heavy steel doorframe. Vance shot one final, desperate look over his shoulder, the millionaire reduced to cargo, before the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him inside the federal machine. Mercer turned his attention back to the inspector. He touched his bleeding ribs. "Keep the bounty," Mercer said, the exhaustion pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I left my badge on a desk 3 years ago. I refuse to fill out a single page of bureaucratic paperwork. I refuse to answer questions in a windowless room." The inspector frowned, the mirrored sunglasses reflecting Mercer's battered face. "The department demands a report, Sample. You operated outside standard jurisdiction." "I operated on a dead man's promise," Mercer countered, the steel returning to his voice. "I delivered your prisoner. I delivered your hardware. The contract concludes right here on the asphalt." Mercer pushed himself off the Tahoe fender. He tested the weight on his right knee, finding a fragile, agonizing balance. "I require a medic to stitch this slice on my ribs," Mercer said, pointing a calloused finger at the nearest Suburban. "Then I require a transport vehicle. You owe me a ride to a town holding a legitimate steakhouse. I prefer a bone-in ribeye." Medium rare. The inspector stared at the stubborn ex-marshal. He looked at the bloody badge pouch on his chest. He looked at the secured bearcat. He understood the debt the federal government owed the man standing in the dirt. The inspector nodded once. He keyed the radio microphone on his shoulder. "Bring the trauma kit to the lead vehicle," the inspector ordered. He gestured toward the open door of the black Suburban. "We patch you up, Sample. Then we find you a stake." Mercer limped toward the waiting SUV, leaving the armored Tahoe, the titanium drive, and the cartel war behind him in the desert dust. Chapter 20. The federal medic utilized 12 sutures to close the machete wound, pulling the thick black nylon thread tight across Mercer Sample's ribcage. The sliced skin burned with a sharp, localized fire every time he inhaled, a constant physical reminder of the rusted iron cathedral in San Felice. He ignored the pain, focusing his absolute attention on the heavy porcelain plate sitting on the scratched Formica table. He dragged a serrated wooden-handled steak knife through a 16-ounce bone-in ribeye. Blood pooled on the white porcelain, mixing with coarse black pepper and melted butter. He ate in absolute silence. The dining room of the Copper Steer restaurant in Ajo sat empty, save for a tired waitress wiping down the pie case and a ceiling fan beating the stale air-conditioned breeze. Mercer chewed the rare meat, feeling the protein and iron hit his exhausted system. He drank from a thick ceramic mug filled with bitter, scalding black coffee. The caffeine and the hot food chased the lingering cold of the refrigerant fog out of his bones. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, leaving a smear of grease and a tiny speck of dried blood on the white pulp. He reviewed the events of the previous 24 hours. A burned transport van. A dead U.S. Marshal. A corporate thief possessing phantom millions. A cartel enforcer resting at the bottom of a slag pit. The chaos stripped away his truck, his favorite denim jacket, and a significant portion of his blood volume. It left him sitting in a roadside diner with a hole in his side. Julian Vance rode north in the belly of a federal armored transport. The accountant faced years of fluorescent lights, steel bars, and processed food. The federal prosecutors possessed the titanium drive, the empty decoy, and they possessed the architect of the invisible empire. They stripped Vance of his bespoke suits and his offshore accounts. They reduced the millionaire to a federal inmate number. Mercer felt zero pity. Vance played a high-stakes game with dangerous men, utilizing digital loopholes to steal physical blood money. The house always collected the debt. Marshal Miller died in the dirt, far from a hospital, far from his family. He died wearing a nylon tactical vest, soaked in his own blood. He died protecting a thief. The job demanded absolute sacrifice, and the job offered a folded flag in return. Mercer understood the transaction. He lived the transaction for 20 years. He carried the weight of the badge until the weight broke his knee, and then he carried the ghost of the badge to honor a dying man's final request. He dropped 2 crumpled $20 bills and a 10 next to his empty plate, pushed himself out of the red vinyl booth, and limped through the glass double doors into the midday heat. The Arizona sun baked the asphalt parking lot, creating shimmering thermal waves above the blacktop. The heat hit him like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the refrigerated air of the diner. A faded blue 1998 Ford F-150 sat parked near the rusted green restaurant dumpster. A piece of torn cardboard, taped to the inside of the windshield, displayed a phone number and a price written in thick black marker. $3,000. The body panels showcased a heavy coat of primer and rust, and the rear bumper drooped on the left side, but the all-terrain tires held deep tread. The truck possessed character. It possessed scars. Mercer pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing the number on the cardboard. A man answered on the second ring, the sound of sizzling grease echoing in the background. The man identified himself as Hector, the fry cook working the kitchen grill inside the steakhouse. "I stand by the dumpster," Mercer spoke into the receiver. "I evaluate the blue Ford. The transmission leaks red fluid onto the asphalt. The exhaust manifold features a crack. I possess $2,000 cash. I require the keys." Hector sighed over the phone. "The engine burns oil. You add a quart every 500 miles. But the four-wheel drive engages. 2,000 buys the pink slip. Bring the paperwork out the back door." 5 minutes later, Hector pushed through the metal screen door of the kitchen. He wore a stained white apron over a faded black t-shirt. He handed over a tarnished brass key and a signed, notarized vehicle title. Mercer peeled $200 bills from his money clip, pressing the cash into the cook's damp hand. "Check the tire pressure," Hector advised, pocketing the roll of bills. "The front left loses air in the cold." "I appreciate the disclosure," Mercer said. Hector nodded, turned around, and disappeared back into the grease-scented kitchen. Mercer unlocked the heavy steel door and climbed into the cab. The bench seat featured a torn vinyl cover patched with strips of silver duct tape. The interior smelled of old tobacco, pine needles, and baked dust. He inserted the brass key into the ignition cylinder and turned the metal. The starter motor whined, caught, and settled into a rough, uneven idle. The engine knocked, but it produced steady power. He opened the glove box, searching for a registration slip or an owner's manual. He found a plastic comb missing 3 teeth and a folded, faded map of the Sonoran Desert. He tossed the map onto the cracked passenger seat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. He opened the fold and counted the remaining currency. $240. A federal pension check arrived in 4 days, direct deposited into a modest checking account. He lacked savings. He lacked investments. Julian Vance offered $10 million to look the other way, promising generational wealth and private islands. Raul Bispo offered a severance package of $5 million to step aside and surrender the prisoner. The numbers represented abstract concepts, phantom digits floating in a digital ledger on a decentralized blockchain. They held zero physical mass. They purchased loyalty, they purchased armies, but they evaporated into the ether at the stroke of midnight. The silver star, resting in the senior inspector's tactical pouch, represented a concrete reality. Marshal Miller died bleeding on the floorboards of a crushed van, clutching that reality. Mercer kept the promise, delivered the package to the federal convoy, and balanced the ledger on his own terms. He traded a fortune for a clear conscience and a bruised ribcage. He shifted the steering column transmission into reverse, backed the rusted Ford out of the parking space, and steered the truck toward the state highway access road. The 2-lane blacktop stretched south, a ribbon of gray asphalt cutting through the red rocks and the towering saguaro cactus. The landscape offered absolute silence and immense crushing isolation. The desert forgave zero mistakes and held zero grudges. Mercer cranked the manual window handle, rolling the glass down into the door frame. He rested his left arm on the hot metal ledge. The dry, furnace-hot desert wind rushed into the cabin, pulling the smell of stale tobacco out the opposite window and replacing it with the scent of baked earth and dry mesquite. "Dead weight," Mercer murmured, the sound of his own voice swallowed by the roar of the V8 engine and the rush of the wind whipping through the cab. "Some men carry it in a canvas duffel bag. Some men carry it in their heads." He pressed the accelerator pedal toward the floorboards. The old truck gathered speed, rattling and shaking over the uneven pavement. He pointed the chrome grille toward the deep horizon, driving away from the chaos, leaving the ghosts of San Felice and the vanished millions behind him in the dust. He needed a hot bath. He needed a fresh shirt. He needed to find a quiet border town where the stakes involved cheap plastic poker chips instead of human lives. The blue Ford shrank to a speck against the vast expanse of the Badlands, a single moving element in a static, unforgiving world, rolling south toward the quiet. The end. Did you get your copy of Tulsa Time?